Serving while presiding.
Good morning, we're on the record on Norma Anderson v. Janet Griswold with the interveners, Colorado Republican State Central Committee, and Donald J. Trump. May I introduce some appearance? Just one person for each group to make the appearances.
Good morning, Your Honor. Eric Olson for petitioners, along with Sean Grimsley, Jason Murray, Martha Turney, Mario Nicholas, and Nicholas Sus.
Thank you.
Good morning, Your Honor. Scott Kessler on behalf of President Trump. With me is Jeff Blue, Jacob Roth, Chris Halban, who's not been admitted yet pro se. We'll keep him quiet. Mr. Justin North as well. And I think that's it for our side for the attorneys. Thank you, Your Honor.
There's so many of you, it becomes a memory test.
Here's more for the list. Jane Raskin on behalf of the intervener, Republican State Committee, Republican Party of Colorado. With me, Mike Melito, Nathan Mulker, and Bob Kitzmiller.
Great. For some reason, it's the Colorado Republican State Central
Committee. A lot of C's in there.
Yeah, which gets me tripped up as well.
Good morning, Your Honor. Michael Kudlarczyk from the Attorney General's Office on behalf of Secretary of State Janet Griswold. With me at council table is the Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Beal, and also Jen Sullivan from the Attorney General's Office.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Are the petitioners ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. I do think one preliminary matter about the potential expert from intervener Trump, based on discussion this morning, they've said that they've decided an expert is not available, so that they're not going to call an expert. New expert, yeah.
That's correct, Your Honor. It was also on the show. We went out together.
Okay.
And then also, we are withdrawing one witness.
Okay.
And I think I notified opposing counsel.
Okay.
Thank you. We ready to proceed with testimony? Oh, sorry.
I just have one thing, Your Honor, for clarification for the protective order. Are we at this point able to reveal the names of witnesses? I know some of them were revealed in opening argument, but I want to just a clarification.
Do the petitioners have a point of view? I think you were mainly concerned about the witnesses you were calling.
Correct. I guess the question is going forward, or is it a question to unseal the stuff that's been filed already?
I've had questions about the names of witnesses. I'd like to be able to reveal them, but I don't want to be the protective order.
Of your own witnesses?
Yes.
So our view is what Your Honor said, which was we wanted to make sure that we didn't lose any witnesses before the hearing, which we did. But now that we're underway in a public proceeding, the names of the witnesses are fine to reveal.
Okay, that's fine with the court as well.
Are we ready to start with testimony?
If you are.
I am. At this point, petitioners call Dr. Peter Simi.
Will you raise your right hand, please? Do you, under the penalty of perjury, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Great. Just make sure to speak into the microphone, okay?
Good morning, Dr. Simi.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself and spell your last name?
Pete Simi, S-I-M-I.
Dr. Simi, what do you do?
Professor of Sociology at Chapman University.
Where's Chapman?
It's in Southern California.
You're here as an expert witness. How would you describe your expertise?
In short, political violence and political extremism.
How do you know about political violence and political extremism?
I've been studying these issues my entire career, 27 years, since 1996.
Do you have any formal training in political violence and political extremism?
Yes, I earned a PhD in sociology. That was one of the main emphases of my studies in 2003.
And you said you've been working in this field for about 25, 27 years. Tell us a little bit about the kind of work you've done over the past 2.5 decades.
Yeah, I've collected data using a number of different methods to study political extremism and political violence, to include ethnographic fieldwork, interviews with current and former members of extremist groups, and then a variety of different types of archival methods to gather data and information about both political extremism and political violence.
I want to talk about some of the methodologies you just mentioned, and to help us keep track, I'm going to write them down on the flip chart so we can come back to it a couple times during your testimony.
Okay.
And I believe the first kind of methodology you mentioned was fieldwork, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. What is fieldwork?
Fieldwork is a type of method that's employed by a range of different disciplines in the social sciences and frankly outside the social sciences in the military and business world as well. But it's a method of gathering information where you spend time with people in their natural environments in order to understand a culture, a community, a group, a set of individuals, learn from their perspective, learn how they understand the world, learn about their lives, in natural settings. And so for me, that's meant spending lots of time with active members of different types of extremist groups, actually living with families and individuals in some cases, attending gatherings and so forth.
When you say living with families in some instances, tell us a little bit more about that kind of field work.
Well, that's sometimes referred to as embedded field work, where you're actually, living with the objects of your study, the subjects of your study, and that for me that meant staying in spare bedrooms or crashing on the living room couch and observing individuals in their daily lives and the other types of activities that they're involved in beyond what they do in their home.
And I believe the second kind of methodology you mentioned that you relied on for your past 2.5 decades was interviews. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Tell us what you mean by interviews.
Well, interviews are basically a structured type of conversation where you sit down with a person and ask specific questions based on whatever the focus of your study is. And so again, for me, that meant interviewing current members of extremist groups, but also former members as well.
What was the third kind of methodology you mentioned?
Archival.
Okay. Tell us what archival work is.
Well, that's kind of a big bucket. It covers a broad kind of range of different things would fall under archival research. That would be, if you think about an archive, it's basically just a collection of information. Sometimes archives are generated for very specific purposes to allow researchers to conduct studies of various kinds. And other archives are not necessarily generated for that purpose explicitly, but they do provide researchers an opportunity to conduct studies. So if you think about, for instance, a video archive would be YouTube. And then, of course, there's lots of different historical archives that are available at universities, for example. Social media is a type of archive where you're setting platforms and how people communicate on platforms. That would be a kind of archive. Websites are a kind of archive. Newspapers are a kind of archive. So it does cover a broad range of things that fall in that.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Simi. And if I could just make a request for the core reporter's benefit, if we could slow down a little bit when we're talking, I'm sure everyone would appreciate it. Now, are these three kinds of methodologies that we talked about, are those standard methodologies used in sociology?
Very much so.
How do you know that?
Well, working in the field for 27 years, part of that is that's part of my job. Part of what you do in terms of presenting your research at professional conferences. That's one of the things that's discussed is research methodology. When you submit your research for peer review in terms of academic journal articles, research methods are certainly scrutinized and reviewed. And then I teach both undergraduate research methods now at Chapman, but previously at the University of Nebraska, I taught PhD level research methods.
Is your teaching, is that just part of the course, or is that a standalone course?
Research methods is a standalone course.
Okay. And are the methods that we're talking about today, the methods you teach in your research methods course?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of your experience with each of these methodologies, and I want to talk first generally, and then we'll talk specifically about the groups involved in the January 6th attack. Okay.
Sure.
How much field work have you done generally in your career to study extremist groups?
Thousands of hours, literally.
Okay. And then have you done field work? Well, I know I'm supposed to talk in the microphone, so let me ask a question. Have you done field work? Let me ask a special question. What groups have you identified as playing a leading role in the January 6th attack?
The Proud Boys, 3%ers, and Oath Keepers.
Okay. Have you also done field work with those groups?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So, if it's okay with you, Dr. Simi, I'll just write J6 and then put all three. Is that okay to show your familiarity with the groups involved in this case?
Yes,
Okay.
that's fine.
Sorry, what does the J6 stand for?
The groups involved in January 6th. Sorry, trying to fit it all on one chart, Your Honor. For interviews, how many interviews of right-wing extremists have you done in your career?
217.
And how many interviews have you done with members of the Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and 3%ers?
14.
And what about archival research? How would you describe the amount of archival research you've done in your career?
It's a little trickier than the field work where you can count hours of interviews, we count number of interviews. But you can look at it in terms of time spent. You can look at it in terms of number of different archives, number of websites, social media platforms. But given that that's really where I started in 1996 was online and doing archival research online, definitely in the thousands.
Okay. And have you done archival research involving the three groups involved in January 6th?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Now, Dr. Simi, I want to talk a little bit about your work in this case. How did the archival material available for your work here compare to the kind of archival material you typically rely on?
It's very consistent.
How's that?
Similar types of materials, social media materials, court documents, scholarship, existing scholarship, folks who are also studying the same topics, looking at their findings, government reports, just a variety of different kinds of materials that I've used over the years, very comparable to what's done in this case.
And You've used all three methodologies for your work in this case, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Is it common for work in sociology to rely on all three of these methodologies?
Well, this would be referred to as a multi-method approach, and multi-method approaches are often referred to as kind of gold standard. Certainly to conduct research in a accurate manner doesn't require using all three. You could conduct a very legitimate study with any one or some combination, but using all three certainly would be, like I said, kind of the gold standard.
Dr. Simi, have you testified as an expert before?
Yes, I have.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Testified in the Science v. Kessler civil case that was related to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. As you may recall, that was a rally that turned deadly violent in 2017, and I testified on behalf of plaintiffs in that case as it relates to the way in which the Unite the Right rally was organized and the central role that violence played in how the event was organized.
Have you worked on other cases as an expert?
Yes, I have.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I testified in a murder case in Portland, Oregon. I was asked by the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office to review some materials in terms of statements and posts and so forth that the defendant who had been charged in that case had made. And the District Attorney's Office asked for me to offer an opinion as to whether I felt those statements were consistent with white supremacist extremist beliefs.
Have you ever worked on behalf of defendants in cases?
Yes, I have many times. I've worked with federal public defenders' offices, for example, across the country.
Now, have you published on extremist political violence?
Yes, I have.
Tell us about some of your publications.
Well, I've written a number of articles, more than 60 peer-reviewed articles or book chapters and edited volumes that address different facets of political violence and political extremism, and I've published co-authored 2 books on the topic.
Tell us about the 2 books.
Okay. The first book was American Swastika Inside the White Power Movement in Today's Debate. That relied on all 3 of the methods that we were just discussing, fieldwork and interviews and archival research. And the basic focus of the book was looking at the kind of cultural and social spaces that are important to white supremacist extremists in terms of sustaining their beliefs and the central role that violence plays within that culture. And the second book that's due to be published in the next month or so, I guess, is actually looking at the forces or the influences that ultimately led to the attack on the Capitol on January 6th.
What's your new book called?
Out of Hiding.
Why'd you choose that title?
Well, we look at the way in which, starting with the election of Barack Obama in 2008 and a series of other developments following that, how that led to a substantial reemergence of far-right extremists.
And the out of hiding refers to sort of coming out of hiding?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Now, on the screen, I've put Plaintiff's Exhibit 161, which is a copy of your CV, and I don't want to go in to everything in this, and really welcome guidance from Your Honor in terms of how you want to do this, but would it be easiest to move to him as a demonstrative exhibit so you have an understanding of his expertise, Your Honor? Or we can go through a couple of highlights. What would be most preferable to you?
I would just walk through his qualifications. The highlights would be fine.
Okay, great. So, Dr. Simi, if we scroll down, we see your education, and we've already talked about that. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the trainings that you've given?
Yes, we've done a number of trainings for law enforcement, the legal field, educators over the years. In terms of law enforcement, I've provided training to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Homeland Security, Federal Bureau of Prisons, Department of Justice, and a number of state level and local level law enforcement agencies across the country. I've done trainings for legal organizations like the American Bar Association and educational institutions across the country.
And have you received some grants and some grants from federal government agencies to study political extremism?
Yes, I have.
Can you tell us, it's on the screen right now, can you tell us a couple examples of those?
Sure. The National Institute of Justice, which is housed in the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security.
What kind of trainings do you provide? What kind of grants, what kind of work do you do under those grants?
Sure. It's basic research. That is research intended to look at different questions as it relates to the causes and consequences of political extremism and political violence, looking at different factors at the individual, group, and broader societal level in terms of what kinds of things influence these issues and what kinds of measures seem to be most effective in terms of countering them.
And here on the screen, I have your expert legal consultation. Is this a list of the cases where you've been retained as an expert on this page and the next?
Yep, it appears to be.
Okay. And then, did you provide testimony to the January 6th committee?
Yes, I did.
Why was that?
I was invited to provide written testimony.
Fair to say, Dr. Simi, you've been working on issues of right-wing extremism well before we've been working together in this case?
Yes, I have. My entire career, basically.
Okay. Did you work with us to prepare a demonstrative exhibit to summarize your work in this case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Having a little bit of computer issue. Let me see if I can bring it up on the right screen.
While you're doing that, I just have a quick question. You said that the book, Coming Out of Hiding, is from 2008 forward. When did kind of culminating on January 6th? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Did you start working on it before January 6th?
We did. Yeah, we did. And that happened while we were working on it, which obviously added an additional item, that certainly an additional development that we needed to address because it was a new, obviously, facet that is a substantial, important historical event that was very relevant to what we were already analyzing and discussing.
So it was a work in progress, and then that becomes a new chapter or chapters.
Exactly.
Thank you.
On that, Dr. Simi, did you express any concerns about the possibilities of violence related to the aftermath of the 2020 election before it happened?
Yes, I did.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in the summer of 2020, I thought it was pretty clear that depending on the outcome of the election, there was a lot of anger and resentment and mobilization that was really starting to increase among far-right extremists, and that should Donald Trump not be reelected, I thought it was pretty clear that far-right extremists would respond with political violence.
I think I got the tech issues worked out. So is this demonstrative that we worked together to prepare for your summary?
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's go to the first page. And tell us, what topics did you address in your work in this case?
Looking at the kind of defining characteristics of far-right extremism, including kind of central aspects of the communication style, the influence that Donald Trump and the relationship Donald Trump has developed with far-right extremists. That includes certain communication strategies, the motives for those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, and then Donald Trump's role in the attack on the Capitol.
How does your expertise over the past 27 years help you address these topics?
Well, when you've spent as much time as I have directly observing, directly engaging, interviewing active and formerly active members of far-right extremist groups, and those aren't, who aren't affiliated with specific groups as well, understanding that culture provides lots of different types of insight about things like motivations. And then the archival research is really important as well, because that also provides certain insight about people's perspectives, motivations, communication strategies, and so forth.
You talked about communication strategies. Can you give us a couple examples of things that are particularly unique to right-wing extremist communication, just to help us understand what you mean by that?
Sure. In terms of this case, for example, 1776 is very relevant. To an outsider, that might just sound like a number or a fairly innocuous historical reference to the Revolutionary War. But to insiders within far-right extremist culture, that has a very specific connotation in relationship to violence, and it really is a direct call to violence.
Tell us a little bit about the materials that you reviewed in this case to address these four issues.
Before you go there, I just have one follow-up question, sorry.
No, please, go ahead.
When you're talking about the field work, and you said that sometimes you, you say you embed yourself, like what do you mean? How is that different than an interview? And does the group that you're embedding yourself, like, do they know that you're embedding yourself, or are you undercover? I'm just trying to understand what the distinction is between the field work and the interviews.
Sure, it's a great question, The field work would involve a more immersive experience from a research standpoint. So it would include a lot of observation. It would include informal interviews, which would be much more conversational in style. When you're embedded, depending on the approval you've received from what's called institutional review board, which academic research is governed under federal regulations under the institutional review boards, there is a way to do that where you don't have to obtain informed consent, and you could do it. You could be embedded surreptitiously without your participants or subjects' knowledge. The field work I did, certainly in terms of folks that I lived with, they knew that I was doing research. Some of the larger gatherings that I attended as part of fieldwork, people wouldn't necessarily know that I was a researcher. They might assume that I was one of them. And then attacking folks, when I first started, this was in the very early days of the internet, so PO boxes were still kind of a thing. So my first context actually, emerged through letters that I wrote to PO boxes, and I was able to meet with individuals in person, and then from there develop relationships to where they were comfortable enough with inviting me into their homes.
And just help us understand how sort of someone who's a member of a right-wing extremist group would say to a university professor, "Why don't you come stay in my bedroom?" Like, how does that come to be?
Doesn't always quite happen like that. Many doors slapped in my face, and certainly been asked in not so polite terms to get lost. So that certainly happens. But for some, they see it, I think, for a lot of different reasons. First, people sometimes enjoy being the focus of attention. So having a researcher say that they're interested in you and want to spend time with you. For some people, they find that satisfying on some level. For some, they see it as an opportunity to get their message out, to recruit potentially if not the researcher, then to at least get their message out there and try and shape things and influence things more broadly. So I think there's a number of different motives that lead to people making those kind of invitations.
And I want to be clear. We've talked about sort of your work with field work and interviews with the groups involved in January 6th. Did that work happen before or after January 6, 2021?
Before.
Okay. Did you rely on all three of these methodologies in your work in this case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And are these the sort of methods and materials that experts in your field reasonably rely on in forming opinions upon the subject of political extremism?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Based on your scholarship, your prior work, and your review of materials in this case, are you familiar with the events of and leading up to January 6th, those who participated in the attack, and Mr. Trump's role in those events?
Yes, I am.
Your Honor, at this point in time, we tender Dr. Simi as an expert on political extremism, including how extremists communicate and how the events leading up to and including the January 6th attack relate to longstanding patterns of behavior and communication by political extremists.
We'll renew our time with two objections, Your Honor.
Professor Simi will be admitted as an expert on political extremism, including how extremism communicates and his interpretation of January 6th vis-a-vis expertise in extremism and extremism communications.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Let's turn to some high-level findings, and then we'll get more granular as our conversation continues. Okay, Dr. Simi?
Absolutely.
So on the screen, we have pictures of the three groups we've talked about, but let's start with a basic definition. What is far-right extremism?
The best way to think about far-right extremism is it's defined by some core characteristics. And let me first say, in terms of thinking about it, visualizing it, is if you think about a constellation in the sky, if you think about a broad-based network, that's what we're talking about with far-right extremism. There's individual adherents, there's groups and organizations. These are all part of this constellation. And it's pretty far-ranging. It includes, a disparate set of elements. But then there are these core characteristics that cut across certain beliefs, practices, and then communication strategies.
Let's talk about some of these core characteristics. What are some of the core characteristics about beliefs in far-right extremism?
Several things, really. Heavy reliance on conspiracy theory, explaining events, situations as a result of kind of shadowy forces that are unseen. And those, the specific types of conspiracy theories are pretty far-ranging. They're kind of adhered to among far-right extremists, but the use of conspiracy theory is very central. A strong distinction between us and them. And of course, people in general make distinctions between us and them, and oftentimes it's quite innocuous. If you think about, for instance, sports fans, make distinctions, Packers fans versus Vikings fans, and so forth. Pretty innocuous stuff for the most part. But what we're talking about here in terms of distinctions between us and them for far-right extremists is that them are really viewed as enemies, as representing an existential threat, and they're often described in very dehumanizing terms. Degenerates, scum, infestation. These kind of dehumanizing terms are often used among far-right extremists to describe the people that they believe are opponents and that represent these threats. Another central kind of tenet is really an anti-democratic ethos that really moves in the direction of supporting authoritarian impulses, authoritarian beliefs, authoritarian leaders, structures of various sorts. So I would say those are kind of three defining aspects of beliefs.
Great. Next on your slide is practices, including violence. Talk to us about the role that violence plays in far-right extremism.
Well, because in part of what I just mentioned about the beliefs, the idea that there's these existential threats out there that have been dehumanized, violence is viewed as a necessary tactic to achieve political goals. Violence is glamorized and glorified in many ways, viewed in a kind of legitimized fashion, seen as a form of self-defense to fend off these existential threats. So it is, again, very central to, certainly not the only practice, but it is a central practice.
The last core characteristic is communication strategies. Tell us a little bit about communication strategies you've observed in your work.
Yeah, so some of the things for communication strategy that I've observed, and other scholars in the field have also observed as relates to far-right extremism, is a reliance on doublespeak, which is a specific kind of deceptive style of communication that often involves using words that have multiple meanings, one meaning for insiders, another meaning potentially for outsiders, using language with a so-called wink and a nod, I might say. Also, making substantial kind of distinctions between front and backstage behavior, so presenting oneself or a group in a particular way that's more favorable on the front stage, and then being much more open about things like the use of violence on the backstage. And the same would apply to the doublespeak in terms of its relationship to violence. It's a technique, a communication strategy that's used to promote violence, but in a kind of deceptive way.
And let me stop right there, Dr. Simi. Where would the 1776 example that you talked to us about earlier fit in to this vocabulary you're talking about right now?
Yeah, that would be a type of doublespeak, because again, it would have a certain meaning to outsiders who aren't familiar with the kind of inside culture, but to insiders within culture, they would understand and interpret that word differently.
Do all far-right extremists share these beliefs, practices, and communication strategies?
These are core characteristics that cut across the culture, but we are dealing with a large culture that has different elements, and so you're going to see varying degrees, but these characteristics do have a high degree of salience that does cut across the culture.
Now, you've selected three groups to highlight here on this slide. Can you tell us a little bit about each of these groups?
Sure. First group to my left is the Proud Boys, and they were founded in 2016 by Gavin McInnes, more recently been led by Enrique Tarrio. They were really founded, according to McInnes' own words, as a violent street gang with a political ideology that's referred to as Western chauvinism.
Sorry, you said Western?
Chauvinism.
Okay. I'm sorry. Tell us a little bit more about the Proud Boys.
Oh, sure. So the political violence that they gravitate towards is directed towards people that they believe to be political opponents. And the emphasis or the central nature of violence for the Proud Boys is kind of best, I guess you might say, exemplified by their mantra, fuck around and find out. Excuse my language, and that's a commonly used mantra. In fact, you actually see it in the image there in terms of the acronym. But that's really kind of in a nutshell how they view the important use of violence to achieve their goals.
Tell us about the Oath Keepers.
Sure. They were founded in 2009 by Stuart Rhodes, who's a Yale Law School graduate. And the Oath Keepers were part of the second wave of the anti-government militia movement that emerged shortly after Barack Obama's election in 2008. first wave was, of course, during the 1990s, ultimately culminated in the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, and then the movement kind of somewhat dissipated for a period of time, but it then had a second wave that reemerged in 2008. And so the Oath Keepers were part of that. They focus a lot on the idea of law enforcement and military maintaining their oath to maintain the Constitution, which they believe the government has become tyrannical and is violating the Constitution. They adhere to lots of different types of conspiracy theories about the government putting people in detention camps and things of that nature. So there's a high degree of kind of paranoia among the Oath Keepers. They've been involved in various armed standoffs, like the Bundy Ranch standoff in 2014 in Nevada, and the Mount Herb Wildlife Refuge in Oregon standoff that occurred there in 2016, and several others. And so that's kind of the Oath Keepers in a nutshell.
What about the 3%ers?
They were founded just a year before the Oath Keepers, so in 2008. So they were also part of the second wave of the anti-government militia movement that emerged at that time. And the 3%ers were founded by Mike Vanderwerf, who actually had been involved in the first wave of militia movement in the 1990s. And they developed kind of more of a decentralized set of different types of 3%er groups across the country. They've been involved in actual plots, domestic terror plots on multiple occasions. And their name itself refers to the idea, the actually inaccurate idea, that only 3% of the colonists fought against the British in the American Revolution. And the reason why that's important for them is because they believe they're this same kind of vanguard that's now fighting against the U.S. government that's become tyrannical.
Let's turn to the next slide and tell us, we talked generally about the role violence plays in far-right extremism, but tell us why you chose pictures of the Unite the Right rally to show this violence and the role that violence plays more generally.
Well, it was a very important event among far-right extremists. Of course, the name itself indicates in part some of their efforts in terms of uniting the right, and the fact that violence was always intended to be part of this event. When you looked at the social media platforms where Unite the Right was organized, Discord and other platforms, there were discussions, for example, of using automobiles to attack individuals, their counter-protesters, which obviously ultimately happened on the second day.
Is that what we see on the right?
Yes, yeah, so there you see James Field's car mowing into this group of counter-protesters in the afternoon after the state of emergency had been called and things were starting to disperse. And of course, Heather Heyer was murdered in this car attack, and a number of other individuals. You see there, Marcus Martin in midair. He was permanently disabled from his being struck by the car, as were a number of other individuals seriously injured. So we had the car attack, and then to the left you see the way in which a flagpole is being used to bludgeon individuals they perceive as political opponents. That was also discussed ahead of time. Individuals on Discord platform and other platforms were talking about what types of instruments they could use as weapons, and the importance of framing it as self-defense, and also the importance of framing it as that we're just joking about committing violence.
I want to talk a little bit more about this framing as self-defense. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, given that within society we generally recognize the right that individuals have to defend themselves in certain situations when they may be harmed or their life is being threatened, anytime an individual or group can frame their violence as self-defense, it offers a degree of legitimacy. And that's true of individuals and it's true of groups. It's also part of this worldview that they have, that they really are under threat, under attack from a variety of forces. And so therefore, anytime they engage in violence, from their perspective, it becomes kind of seen as a type of self-defense.
And you mentioned some of the humor, I believe, in your answer just now. Let's turn to the next slide and tell us what you see on the left. Why did you choose to have this quote from Robert Ray on the left?
So Robert Ray was one of the central organizers of the Unite the Right rally. And here he's actually explaining, and this is where archival material becomes really useful and important from a research standpoint, because in this quote he's explaining the role or the function in terms of how they use humor to essentially promote violence, but do it in a way that's not always obvious, to keep people off balance in terms of not knowing whether their calls for violence are meant to be taken seriously or not. They know as insiders that the calls are meant to be taken seriously, but they understand that by framing it as humor, outsiders may not always be able to discern the difference.
And one more question on the violence and far-right extremism. Does everyone attracted to far-right extremism engage in violence?
No, not at all. I think we can talk about kind of different roles that individuals have in terms of within this culture as it relates to violence. One are violence planners. That is, these are individuals who really help orchestrate, plot violence, but aren't directly involved in it themselves. Stuart Rhodes and Mickey Terrio would be current examples that fit that mold. Then you have your violent implementers. These are individuals who may help in the planning or may not help in the planning, but their primary kind of role is to actually execute or implement the violence. These individuals often come prepared to commit violence. They may have weapons of various sorts or other instruments that are helpful for them in terms of trying to complete their violent acts. Then you have other folks that, in some situations, they may be open to committing violence, but they're not involved in the planning, and they aren't necessarily intending to commit violence at the outset, but given a certain situation, they might be open to it, or certainly at least wouldn't necessarily prevent violence from occurring. And then you have kind of a fourth bucket of folks that are kind of sympathetic bystanders, you might say. And these are folks who aren't planning, they're not engaging in the violence, but they may more indirectly, in more subtle ways, support the violence.
And on the left, we see a picture of the person attacking wearing a helmet and goggles. Is that an example? Like, what category of would you put someone like that in?
I would say probably a violence implementer.
Why is that?
Well, they've come prepared for violence in terms of having the goggles and the headgear, and then they're using an instrument that's meant to be for displaying a symbol. They've turned that into a weapon. And again, based on what we know about how the Night the Riot was planned and the directives that were discussed in great length about how to use things like flagpoles as weapons, I think that certainly we could even further this person getting prepared to use the flagpole.
Great. All right, let's go to the communication style. And on the right, we have a video of Nick Fuentes. Who is Nick Fuentes?
In short, he's a white supremacist leader, quite influential among folks that follow him. He was present at the attack on the Capitol, January 6th. He was present at Unite the Right rally. He has a substantial presence in terms of social media platforms, and, as well as offline.
And we'll play the video, but just to make sure we're keeping the housekeeping done correctly, this is P-120, which is admissible but hasn't yet been admitted under the court's October 27th order. So I'll go ahead and play the video.
Is he part of one of the three groups, or is he out on his own?
No, he's not involved in those three groups.
And what you said was which video?
P-120. Can I play the video, Your Honor?
You and I received although should not advise that, but I mean, what else you do, right?
So,
Could you actually replay it a little louder?
yes.
Okay, you and I received besides that, although should not advise that, but I mean, what else you do, right?
So, Dr. Simi, why did you include this video of Nick Fuentes?
It's an illustration of how the doublespeak works in real time, where you have both advocacy and then part of doublespeak is about developing plausible deniability, where you insert certain aspects in terms of the communication that allows you then to say after the fact, well, I didn't mean it, or it gives you some type of kind of built-in excuse, you might say, built-in rationale for why you shouldn't be taken in terms of saying what you said as a promotion of violence. So this really kind of exemplifies that style of communication, and I think it's important to recognize that among far-right extremist leaders like Nick Fuentes, you're not going to see very often just completely open promotions of violence. Oftentimes, there is these efforts to build in plausible deniability so that it's not completely obvious, and a person can't be, or it's more difficult to hold a person criminally or civilly liable for promoting violence. So this is very consistent with what we see among far-right extremists more broadly.
To make sure we understand exactly what you mean, talk us through the specific things that Mr. Fuentes did in this video that is that doublespeak.
Yeah, you want to replay it one more time?
Sure.
Okay, you and I received besides that, although
Stop. So right there.
not advising that, but I mean, what else you do, right?
You're right. First statement is, killing state legislatures. We get saying, what else are you going to do? And then we get the negation. But I'm not suggesting that. But then what else can you do, right? So it's kind of a teeter-totter back and forth in terms of promoting, bringing it back, and then still promoting. And so that's the strategy.
Are these techniques unique to far-right extremists?
Doublespeak and front and backstage behavior, these are common aspects of human behavior more broadly. All of us, I would assume in this room at some point in our lives have used somewhat of deceptive language, have used some types of doublespeak. We all present ourselves differently on the front stage. If you think about a job interview, for example, you're going to present yourself in one fashion. And on the backstage, when we're in the privacy of our home, we might engage differently. So these are very common things. What's distinctive about what we're talking about here today is that the front and backstage and the doublespeak are connected to violence and the use of violence. And so that's what distinguishes far-right extremists in these respects as it relates to these communication strategies.
How do you know these communication strategies work?
Well, that comes again from data collection. That comes from the field work and having the opportunities to observe the culture and how it operates. That comes from interviewing active members of these groups and formerly active members of these groups and having them discuss these strategies and how things are structured in terms of within the culture. And that comes from the archival material. I mean, this quote here from Robert Ray is, again, it's an important example of what can be learned from archival material in terms of some of these issues.
What about instances where violence occurs and then there's discussion of the violence after the occurrence? Have you looked at that in your work?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. What about when violence occurs and there's communication after the violence? Did you look at that in your work in this case?
Yes.
Tell us what you learned about these communication strategies from looking at what people say after violence occurs.
Well, you're going to get certain kinds of promotions, certain kinds of endorsements. Again, it's not always going to be completely transparent in the endorsements for public relations purposes, in particular. But certainly, the endorsements afterwards, in terms of supporting violence, is an important part of reinforcing the kind of cultural central role violence plays within the culture.
What about condemnation after? Is that an important factor, an absence of condemnation? Is that something that you studied?
You know, when you have an absence of condemnation, that then can be interpreted and often is interpreted among far-right extremists as essentially a type of endorsement. It's kind of an endorsement by omission.
And how are you confident that the audiences understand the speaker's messages when they use this communication style?
27 years of gathering data, spending thousands of hours in the field, talking with individuals immersed in this culture, talking with individuals who used to be immersed in this culture and aren't anymore, going through the volume of archival materials. You know, I feel very confident that these strategies are widely understood. Individuals indicate this, and other scholarship finds similar things. So there's consistency in what I found with other scholars who've also studied this issue.
In your report, you talk about repeat interactions between a speaker and the audience. Does repeat interactions influence your conclusion that these communication styles are effective?
Yes, absolutely. Again, that's part of kind of this cultural immersion. As people become more immersed within a cultural environment, and that would be true of any culture really, the more repeated interactions between speaker and audience, the more understanding develops, the more people begin to be able to interpret contextual cues, which are an important part of what we're talking about here. Context is very relevant in terms of understanding communication, and so the more immersed you are within a culture, the more able you are to interpret context.
And talk to us about your earlier example of 1776 through the lens of this immersed in culture and repeat interactions. What did you see in your study?
Well, for individuals that, again, are immersed in the culture, then you're going to, over time, start to develop an understanding of a term like 1776 and how it becomes a call for violence. And so as people interact both online and offline and are exposed to the messaging, then that's where the familiarity develops.
Tell us, I think you said this already, but just to make sure we're clear, based on your work, what does 1776 mean among far-right extremists?
It's a violent call for revolution.
Okay. Did you see examples of 1776 being used as a violent call for revolution leading up to and on January 6th?
Southern speeches. There's a document that the Proud Boys acquired, 1776 returns, which was basically a blueprint for attacking the Capitol. So yes, there were several aspects to which 1776, in my opinion, was being used as a call for violence.
What is, you talked about this document, 1776 returns. Tell us a little bit more about that document.
Well, it's a document that Enrique Carrillo acquired through an associate, and the document was, like I said, it was a blueprint. It had logistics in terms of how to go about attacking the Capitol, had scenarios, vantage points in terms of different location spots, vulnerabilities, and so forth. So it was a recipe of sorts, you might say.
Now I want to turn from far-right extremists generally and focus on their relationship and communication with Donald Trump. Can you describe these, whoops, ahead of myself, the relationship between Donald Trump and far-right extremists?
Well, in my years of studying this, and again, this is confirmed among other scholars, far-right extremists generally would perceive national political leaders with a lot of skepticism and cynicism because of their view of the government being basically corrupt and so forth. So the relationship that developed between Donald Trump and far-right extremists really, in many respects, somewhat unprecedented, certainly at least in recent history, in that far-right extremists really were galvanized by his candidacy starting in 2015, and a relationship really emerged between Donald Trump and far-right extremists, with far-right extremists really seeing him as speaking their language and really addressing many of their key grievances.
So on the screen, we have an excerpt from Donald Trump's campaign launch speech in 2015. Tell us why you chose to highlight this portion of Donald Trump's 2015 speech.
Yes, and if I may just very briefly, even before 2015, Donald Trump was promoting, one of the leading figures for promoting birtherism, challenging the conspiracy theory, challenging Barack Obama's legitimacy to serve as president, and that put him in orbit of folks like Alex Jones, far-right media influencer, and so that was really the beginning. And then when he announced his candidacy for run for president there in June of 2015 and used this language, that was a real kind of clarion call for far-right extremists that this is somebody you want to pay attention to. And you can see here in the quote referring to when Mexico sends its people, they're sending people, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. And some I assume are good people. And using terms like they're rapists, that phrase, that would be the kind of conversations that far-right extremists have and the kind of terminology they use, both on and offline. So there was a real kind of alignment in terms of language with what they heard in his announcement speech, and the things that are important to them.
Is calling people from Mexico claiming they're bringing drugs, crime, and that they're rapists, is that consistent with the Western chauvinism belief structure you mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about what Western chauvinism is.
Well, Western chauvinism is a way of claiming that Western civilization is basically superior, and that other non-Western cultures and civilizations are deficient. And they use terms like, West is right, and so forth, to kind of underscore this point. And so that's Western chauvinism in a nutshell.
Here, Donald Trump ends this quote by saying, some, I assume, are good people. Why doesn't that sort of undo the earlier language?
Well, this is, we get back to what we were discussing earlier in terms of plausible deniability. So you get this kind of negation that's inserted after using this inflammatory language, and that then provides the speaker with this, well, I didn't say all, but for far-right extremists, they hear the rapist part. They hear that language that's so consistent with the kind of conversations they're having, as I mentioned, and understand that the negation is necessary. They understand because this is how they communicate amongst themselves as well, and their own leaders use and establish plausible deniability. So they understand that a national, individual who's running for the office of the presidency is also going to need to establish plausible deniability.
Now, I want to turn to a specific aspect of Donald Trump's communications over the years, and that's this Stop the Steal movement and Trump's role in it. Could you describe the movement generally to the court?
Yeah, it's conspiracy theory that focuses on different aspects of how the 2020 presidential election was corrupt, stolen, fraudulent, marked by substantial amount of fraud, and a variety of different kind of aspects of that conspiracy.
And you've chosen a couple tweets here. Before we talk about the tweets, did Donald Trump start the Stop the Steal language questioning elections in 2020, or did it start before then?
No, it really predates 2020.
Okay. Yeah, what do we see on the screen here?
Yeah, so you see here the upper tweet there from 2012, where Donald Trump is referring to the Romney-Obama election. There were machines that switched the votes for Romney to Obama, and don't let your vote be stolen. So again, using that language, that verbiage about elections being stolen. And then below that, you see from the midterms in 2018 references to election corruption. We must protect our democracy because elections are being stolen.
What relationship did you find between the far-right extremists and the Stop the Steal movement?
A lot of overlap, really, starting at the beginning when it really starts to emerge in full force in 2020. You see one of the first rallies, for example, in Arizona. Alex Jones is present there as a speaker. Armed anti-government militia types are there at that rally in Arizona. And then that continues to be the case as more and more Stop the Steal rallies transpire during that time. You see substantial presence of folks like Proud Boys and others.
Now, moving forward to the 2020 election, in your work, did you see Donald Trump spreading doubt about the 2020 election?
Yes, I did.
Okay, let's look at a couple videos you highlighted. Why did you choose this video from August 17th, 2020?
Because it's multiple months prior to the election, and it's a very clear statement about the election being fraudulent unless Donald Trump is reelected. Okay.
And this video is P61, another one of these deemed admitted but not yet admitted video exhibits, Your Honor. And I guess I forgot to move for the admission of P120. So would you like to play the video, and then I'd like to move to admit both of these?
So on P120, which was the Fuentes,
Yep.
I'm actually going to just consider that a demonstrative and a basis for his report, but not admitted into
Great.
evidence. The two speeches we're about to see, which are which numbers?
Well, P61 is a Trump speech that's not yet been admitted. The one on the right has already been admitted. That's P47.
Okay, so 161, the Trump speech.
All right, so I'll play the video on the left.
Okay.
Because the only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election.
Why did you choose to highlight this video, Dr. Simi?
Well, again, it's multiple months, and we're already getting this narrative, this conspiracy theory.
Multiple months. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before the election itself in November. Yeah, it's very clear, what the message is.
Now let's play the video on the right, and this is from the early morning hours of election night, right?
That's correct.
Okay. At this point in time that Trump is giving this speech, had the election results been determined?
No, it's still unclear. Okay. Undecided.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
Why did you choose to highlight this speech?
This underscores the strategy that had been discussed by people like Steve Bannon, for instance, about claiming victory no matter what on election night, regardless of what the results suggest, claim victory.
Is there anything else notable about how Trump talked about these elections in these two speeches that you'd like to draw our attention to?
Yeah, very, very much. Again, this is the language of corruption, of elections being stolen. For far-right extremists, that's going to resonate because it's central to their worldview, to their perspective, that there's this corrupt system that's preventing them from electing somebody that they support, that the system's rigged. And so again, you're going to have a high degree of alignment there and resonance for far-right extremists with that kind of language.
And did you select some examples of how far-right extremists responded to this language from Donald Trump?
Yes, I did.
All right.
Because the only
What example did you put on the screen here?
Yeah, so these are messages on the Parler social media platform, and this is from Joe Biggs, the Times prominent member of the Proud Boys, and you can see the timestamps there to my left, and beginning at 5:03 p.m. First message, the left is stealing the election, so there's that verb, that alignment there. They're not even trying to hide it. We have no justice, no law and order, and no democracy. And then these are followed up. The second message is there's additional intensification in the second message, which is about 17 minutes later, where there's reference to the Democrats are shameful, un-American commie pieces of shit. I hope you all have shitty fucking lives. Fuck you. So this is representative of a certain kind of intensification, amplification that's happening among far-right extremists as it relates to the idea of the election being stolen. Apologies.
I want to turn from Trump. I want to turn to Trump's relationship or use of some of these techniques to call for political violence that we talked about earlier. I want to go to the next slide. Did you see Trump use these same doublespeak and other communication strategies to call for violence?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Can you look at a couple examples that tell us generally the kinds of things you saw in your work?
What you see is this kind of relationship develops between Donald Trump and far-right extremists. One facet of it, and it's a multi-faceted relationship, really, so it's happening in many different ways, but one facet certainly is through rallies where violence is occurring, and there are both promotion and endorsement of violent incidents or violent assaults that are occurring at rallies. So that would be one facet. Again, I would underscore, though, the relationship is emerging between Donald Trump and far-right extremists in a lot of different aspects to it.
Okay. So the video on the left, Your Honor, is P53. It's another admissible but not yet admitted exhibit.
And that's a video of
It is,
President Trump?
yes.
Okay, 53 will be admitted.
We'll play the video.
This guy was swinging very loud and then started swinging at the audience. And you know what? The audience swung back. And I thought it was very, very appropriate. He was swinging, he was hitting people, and the audience hit back.
How does this exchange support your opinion in this case?
Well, this was a press conference. Actually, Ben Carson had just dropped out, and this was to announce Ben Carson's support for Donald Trump's candidacy. But during the Q&A portion of the press conference, one of the journalists asked Donald Trump about violence at rallies. And so Donald Trump was responding to that question, specifically referring to what appears to have been a violent incident that just recently occurred prior to this at the rally in Las Vegas. And what you hear there is, again, this focus on self-defense, violent self-defense. So he's setting up this scenario that you have these counter-protesters that are kind of antagonizing things, and that his supporters have used violence as a form of self-defense, and he's really endorsing that, and it's pretty clear in the comments.
And, Your Honor, the second video is P56. We'd also move for its submission.
And that is also a speech of President Trump.
Yes.
P56 is admitted.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest and taking down, to them, a very, very important statue.
So set the stage for this video first, and then tell us what you saw in the video.
Sure. So this was a press conference, a press conference on the heels of the Unite the Right rally, which again just is to underscore a deadly Unite the Right rally where one person's murdered and dozens of others injured by white supremacists who had planned and organized an event to be violent, shown up in Charlottesville, Virginia, and executed dozens of acts of violence throughout the day, including murder. And during this press conference, we hear the president refer to there being fine people. And one of the things, as part of this group of white supremacists who gathered that day, and one of the things certainly that we know is white supremacists and other far-right extremists heard that message as an endorsement. And they tell us that. They thanked the president afterwards for the comments.
Who thanked the president?
David Duke, who was present that day at the Unite the Right rally, longtime neo-Nazi Klansman. Richard Spencer, one of the key organizers of Unite the Right, who was present that day. Andrew England, the founder of the Daily Stormer, who wasn't present at Unite the Right, but a leading kind of influencer among far-right extremists. All three of those folks thanked the president for the comments and said that they understood some degree of kind of condemnation in the comments was necessary on his part, but in large, they took it as an endorsement.
In your work on leaders of political extremism, have you ever seen a national leading political figure endorse violence in the way that you've seen Donald Trump endorse violence?
No, I have not.
Now, let's go to a rally in Alabama. And tell us what we're going to see here.
So on my left there, the rally in Alabama, Birmingham, you're going to hear Donald Trump comment about a protester at the rally and needing to be removed.
And then what do we see on the right?
And then the following day is Fox News segment where Donald Trump is calling in on the phone and is being asked a question about what happened at the rally.
And Your Honor, this is exhibits P50 and P48. We've moved for both of their admissions.
Let me, I'll admit P is the one on the left.
P50 is on the left.
P50, and let me
Okay.
see that interview before I
Great.
go in.
All right, let's play P50. Okay, Dr. Simi?
Sure.
Get him out of here, will you, please? Get him out of here. Throw him out.
And then now, And he's referring to a protester there? Yeah. And now let's play the interview P48.
And it was I don't know, you say roughed up. He was so obnoxious and so loud, he was screaming. I had 10,000 people in the room yesterday, 10,000 people. And this guy started screaming by himself. And then, I don't know, what he should have been roughed up. Because it was absolutely disgusting what he was doing. This was not handled the way Bernie Sanders handled his problem, I would tell you. But I have a lot of fans, and they were not happy about it. And this was a very obnoxious guy who was a troublemaker who was looking to make trouble. But I didn't get to see the event.
What? Sorry.
Is 51?
P48.
P48 is a minute.
Thank you, Your Honor. So tell us, Dr. Simi, what did you see in Trump's reaction the next day about his relationship to political violence?
You get an endorsement, right? You get, again, the built-in kind of self-defense argument there in terms of his comments, but you get an endorsement. Maybe he should have been roughed up. You get the maybe inserted, which qualifies it a bit, but what far-right extremists hear is they hear the comments at the rally, the strong language about getting him out of here. The person's assaulted at the rally by multiple people, and then the next day, Donald Trump essentially endorses the assault that's committed.
Okay. And we have one more series of a pair of Trump videos. Let's go to that slide. And Your Honor, these are both Trump speeches, P123 and P56, and they're both just Trump speaking.
123 and 126.
It's P56 and 123.
P56 and 123.
Thank you very much.
Hey, don't hurt him. Don't hurt him. See if I say, go get him. I get in trouble with the press. The most dishonest human beings in the world. The worst. If I say, don't hurt him, then the press says, well, Trump isn't as tough as he used to be. Can you believe this?
So tell us about the communication strategies Donald Trump is using in that video.
Well, he makes this proposition about if I say go get him, which I have no idea why a national political figure would ever say go get him, right? That kind of use that kind of language. So that's that unconventional aspect that we were just talking about. That, for far-right extremists, is something that they are galvanized by, that they're really mobilized by that lack of convention. But he says, if he says that, then he gets in trouble. But if he says don't hurt him, then they say he's weak. And so it's this a very kind of mixed message. But certainly, there's no clear, consistent message about condemning violence in any way, shape, or form, which you would expect among our leaders.
Unless,
Your Honor, I'm going to object. The witness continues to say you would expect this among our leaders. Historically, I'm not aware of any leader like this. We'll accept the court has accepted his expertise in far right-wing extremism. He is not an expert on political discourse, political campaigns, issues along those lines, historical behavior of other presidents. So we object to that. He has very limited expertise here, and that's what he's here for.
I will strike Professor Simi's statement regarding what one would expect of political leaders.
Dr. Simi, in your 27 years working on far-right extremism, do you look at the relationship between far-right extremists and politicians as part of that work you've done?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Both local and national politicians?
That's right.
Okay. In your 27 years of experience, have you ever seen either a statewide or national politician use the kind of language that we're seeing here from Donald Trump about violence?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay. Let's turn to the second video, and before we play the second video on the screen, tell us what you see. Tell us what we're going to see.
This is also from the press conference after Unite the Right, so same press conference, and we saw the earlier clip about fine people, and we're going to see additional comments.
I'm sure in that group there was some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them.
So why doesn't Donald Trump saying there were some rough, bad people sort of serve as a kind of condemnation that you said you were looking for?
Far-right extremists understand that those kinds of negations, that kind of condemnation is going to be necessary on some level. And again, they tell us that. So it's very clear that from an audience perspective, far-right extremists realize that that part of the comments were necessary, but that still the overall message for them they received was affirmation.
And as part of your work on far-right extremism, have you looked at how Trump supporters react to these kind of statements that we've seen?
Yes, I have.
And as a general matter, what did you see?
Yeah, well, I mentioned, for instance, Andrew England and the comments that he made, where he actually literally says that basically Trump, gave us encouragement, affirmation, gave us a little bit of condemnation, which we understand is necessary. Overall, it's good for us. And many non-leaders, rank and file, similar sentiments expressed on various social media platforms and so forth.
Okay. Now, in your work, have you seen other politicians use language like fight, et cetera, in their speech?
Oh, sure.
And what observed differences do you see between Donald Trump's use of rhetoric like that and other political speakers?
Well, this is all about context, what we've been discussing, this relationship between Donald Trump and far-right extremists. It has to be understood within a pattern that developed over multiple years. And so the meaning of words within that pattern, within that context, takes a certain shape. The same word, though, in a different context without that pattern, would obviously have different meanings.
In your study, have you ever seen any other national political figure have the same kind of repeated violence occurring in their presence and refusal to condemn or endorsement of it as you see with Donald Trump?
No, I have not.
Okay. I want to turn now to the events leading up to January 6th. We talked about sort of Donald Trump's relationship with far-right extremists generally, and I want to focus on the lead up to January 6th. And I want to start with admitted exhibit about Donald Trump saying to the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. So let's play this, and then I have a couple questions for you about this statement.
Stand back and stand by.
What impacts did Trump's statement of stand back and stand by to the Proud Boys have?
It was powerful, it's influential, almost immediately, well received as, again, affirmation, as an endorsement of sorts. You start to see Proud Boys turn the mantra into t-shirts that are being sold. And it's not just the Proud Boys that received that message. Far-right extremists more broadly saw and heard that message as affirmation, as an endorsement.
In this exchange, who used the word Proud Boys? Was he asked a question about the Proud Boys, or did he pick that out of his own brain to say it?
Yeah, can you replay it?
Sure.
No, it's right there.
Stand back and stand by.
So, replaying the clip help answer the question?
Yeah, there's some crosstalk, so
Yeah.
it's a little bit harder to it sounds. I mean, he obviously says Proud Boys.
Yep. And you mentioned that Proud Boys and other extremist groups took this as an endorsement. Did Trump eventually issue a statement that these groups understood as a call to stop standing by, but rather to act?
Before you go there, what does stand back, stand by? How did they, in your view, interpret it? Because it doesn't mean anything to me.
Sure. Yeah, they interpreted it as a preparedness, as an endorsement, and to be prepared, and to kind of be on alert, we might say. For something.
And did Donald Trump then tell them what that something was?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Let's show the next slide. What do we see on the left on this slide?
A tweet from Donald Trump.
And in your work, what importance does this tweet have?
Very substantial. You see the reference to a 36-page report about election fraud, and at the end of the statement is the final kind of line: big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there. Will be wild with exclamation point.
Okay. And in your work, did you look at how the far-right extremists reacted to this tweet?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Let's play Exhibit P80. And, Your Honor, this was on the admitted or admissible exhibits. So based on Your Honor's earlier rulings, let's just play this as a demonstration rather than admissible evidence. Okay?
It's Saturday, December 19th. The year is 2020. And one of the most historic events in American history has just taken place. President Trump, in the early morning hours today, tweeted that he wants the American people to march on Washington, D.C. on January 6th, 2021.
And now Donald Trump is calling on his supporters to descend on Washington, D.C., January 6th.
He is now calling on we, the people, to take action and show our numbers.
Donald Trump keeps telling everybody. January 6th, man. January 6th, see you in D.C. That's today, man. This dude is sending this tweet out every single day, and you can see the pieces, friends. They're all moving together for a straight-up lit party in Washington, D.C. on January 6th.
This is the most important call to action on domestic soil since Paul Revere and his ride in 1776.
We're going to only be saved by millions of Americans moving to Washington, occupying the entire area, if necessary, storming right into the Capitol. Now, we know the rules of engagement. If you have enough people, you can push down any kind of a fence or a wall.
This could be Trump's last stand. And it's a time when he has specifically called on his supporters to arrive in D.C. That's something that may actually be the big push. Trump supporters need to say, this is it. It's now or never.
You better understand something, son. You better understand something. Red wave, bitch. Red wave is going to be a red wedding going down January 6th.
On that day, Trump says, show up for a protest. It's going to be wild. And based on what we've already seen from the previous events, I think Trump is absolutely correct.
Well, you better look outside. You better look out January 6th. Get that fucking door open. Look down the street. There's going to be 1 million plus geeked up armed Americans.
The time for games is over. The time for action is now. Where were you when history called you?
What did you see in the reaction of right-wing extremists to Trump's tweet in that video?
There's quite a bit there. You have various references, including specific references to attacking the Capitol, storming the Capitol, pushing indoors. You have a reference to Red Wedding, which is a reference to a TV show, a massacre that occurs on a TV show. You have general kind of calls to action based on the tweet and the tweets that followed in terms of encouraging people to go to January 6th.
In your review of this, did you also look at other reactions of right-wing extremists to Donald Trump's "Will Be Wild" tweet beyond this?
Yes, I did.
And in your general review of the reaction to the "Will Be Wild" tweet, did you see folks understand the purpose of being there?
Yeah, absolutely, including that it's now time to take action. We were on standby, and now it's time for action. Okay. So there's actual explicit references and statements made by far-right extremists about that understanding.
Now, I want to play Exhibit P73 next, which is the video that Trump retweeted the same day as the "Will Be Wild" speech. And I want to play the video, and I want to ask you how you what connection you see between the "Will Be Wild" tweet and the video. Dr. Simi, I have a few questions about this video. Tell us how the communication strategies used in this video relate to communication strategies used by other leaders of far-right extremists.
Well, the fight for Trump and save the world, save America. So again, this goes back to something we're talking a lot about, which is this idea of an existential threat. And that requires certain kinds of action, violent action, to fend off these threats. I should point out that the video is reposted from the Donald Wynn site that became a hotbed for violent far-right extremist comment statements, including specifically related to the attack on the Capitol. And that's that context that's also important that we've been talking a lot about. Looking at that larger context from where the video comes from and the consistency.
And let me stop here. What do you mean by it was reposted from the Donald Wynn? Like, tell us how this video came to be. Donald Trump posted from his Twitter feed, right?
Right.
Okay. So what do you mean by it was reposted from the Donald Wynn?
It originally appeared
okay.
on the Donald Wynn. As a video appears on any platform, it can be reposted on a different platform. Okay. And so prior to Donald Trump posting on Twitter, it had appeared on the Donald Wynn site.
And what significance to you does that context have?
Again, as I mentioned, the Donald Wynn had for quite some time been a hotbed for far-right extremist comment statements involving violence, and then ultimately, in the lead up to the attack on the Capitol, there were specific statements about attacking the Capitol and committing various acts of violence on January 6th. So that's.
And this is donaldwynn.com or something?
Net, which is actually now Patriots, and so the domain name has changed since January 6th.
It was donaldwynn.net.
Yeah,
okay.
I couldn't tell you exactly when the domain name change happened.
And how, based on your work, how do followers, the right-wing extremist followers of Donald Trump, interpret this fight for Trump mantra that we hear chanted over and over again in the video?
Far-right extremists view the word fight in literal terms. And fight implies the need to commit violence to fend off threats. And again, from their perspective, they would see fighting as a form of self-defense.
Now, based on your work...
when you say self-defense, it's more like an existential self-defense of democracy?
It's well, they tend to be anti-democratic, so I would leave out the last part, but yes, definitely an existential threat that needs to be fended off.
The threat to democracy is they see it because they feel like it's corrupt, etc., right?
Yeah, so in that respect,
And talk to us, Dr. Simi, about how this self-defense language, the Stop the Steal movement in the fall of 2020, how that plays into the extremist view of the election process that's going to play out from November through January.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Just following up on the judge's question in terms of the existential threat that you've talked about, far-right extremists seem, and they're framing in terms of self-defense. Let me ask a preliminary question first. How does self-defense, that viewpoint, relate to the way the extremists look at the election and the process that followed the election?
again, it's about this idea of theft and being still having things taken, things stolen. So the election was stolen, the system's corrupted. All of that is consistent with the broader kind of worldview we tend to have.
Okay. And what did they view, based on your work, as the existential threat that the election posed to them?
To no longer have Donald Trump in power, and to have that taken from them.
Now, based on your work, how did far-right extremists react to Trump's calls to come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th?
They were galvanized, mobilized, energized.
Beyond organizing them to come to Washington, D.C. on D.C., what did you see about other reactions they had to Trump's call for them to be there?
Well, a number of things happened after the December 19th tweet, and certainly lots of messaging occurred in terms of far-right extremists being energized and mobilized in terms of towards January 6th.
And on the next slide, we have a couple examples of some extremist reactions to the Will Be Wild tweet. Tell us what we see on the left. First, who is the group, the 3 Percenters Original?
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, 3 Percenters are organized in different kinds of sects. Most of the 3% Original would be one kind of sect of 3 Percenters, and you might have another one, 3 Percenters Kansas, so forth and so on across the country. So this was one of those.
And what do you see in the quote, the first quote, where they say, "Stand ready and are standing by to answer the call from our president"?
Yeah, this is goes to the way in which the comment about that was made during the debate really resonated with far-right extremists, not just the Proud Boys, but here you see the 3 Percenters referencing the statement that Donald Trump made during the debate, and saying that they're ready for action.
And then the next quote says, "Pure evil that is conspiring to steal our country away from the American people." You see that?
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
How does that fit into the pattern of communication you've seen?
Again, it represents the worldview in terms of seeing these imminent threats, these existential threats, deeply tied to the idea of the stolen election, but also more broad than that, basically our country is on the verge of being completely taken away from us.
And the next quote from the 3 Percenters Original is instructing any member who can attend to participate on January 6th, because the President of the United States has put out a general call for patriots of this nation to gather in Washington, D.C. Did you see other examples of far-right extremists viewing the Will Be Wild tweet as a general call for patriots of this nation to gather in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, it was very substantial. I would say across far-right extremists, there was a substantial presence of that reaction.
And on the right, we see another message. Why don't you read the message and tell us how that fits into what you've seen in terms of patterns of communication?
Yeah, so here you have a message that says Trump is calling for Proud Boys to show up on the 6th. So pretty straightforward in terms of that's how the message was received in terms of the tweet.
Okay. Now, beyond using social media to bring people to Washington, D.C. on January 6th, did Trump say or do anything else to communicate his support for protesters who were coming out to support him?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Were there rallies between after the election and before January 6th in D.C.?
Yes, there were.
Okay. Was there one in November?
Yes, there was. 1 million MAGA march.
Okay. And at the Million MAGA march, did it turn violent?
Yes, it did.
Okay. And Your Honor, I'd like to show a video for demonstrative purposes only. This is a video that on the left is of Donald Trump's motorcade sort of driving through the march. It hasn't been admitted, but I think just for demonstrative purpose only, if I could show it to the expert.
Yep.
So what do we see in that video, Dr. Simi?
Well, you see a presidential motorcade driving through the protest, at least the segment of the protest, and obviously they're responding very favorably to the motorcade and very excited and viewing this as what seems to be an affirmation of sorts.
In your work on political violence and extremism, have you ever seen a national politician show support like this for a rally that turned violent?
Objection, Your Honor. That's a leading question.
I'll re-ask it.
Objection sustained.
Dr. Simi, how does the video we just watched relate to your study of other national politicians?
Objection, Your Honor. I don't think he's testified that he studied other politicians beyond scope of expertise.
He did actually previously testify that part of his work includes studying national politics in general and the relationship to extremism. So I'm going to let him answer the question to the extent he can.
I've never seen anything, certainly in recent history, that's similar to this, what happened.
Okay. On the right, what do we see?
So this is a tweet by Donald Trump responding to what happened ultimately in terms of violence that occurred. And you see it starts with Antifa scum ran for the hills today when they tried attacking people at the Trump rally. Because those people aggressively fought back, Antifa waited until tonight. Ultimately says to attack innocent #MAGA people. DC police, get going, do your job, don't hold back.
So was the violence before or after the drive-thru?
After there's an evening.
How did far-right extremists view Donald Trump's comment on the violence?
Endorsement. It's pointing, essentially responsibility at Antifa and using language that would be consistent with the kind of language they would use to describe Antifa as scum. So again, there's an alignment in terms of the language, and then there's the these perceived endorsement of the violence that again framed as self-defense. That the violence directed towards Antifa was necessary for self-defense purposes.
Okay. Were there events outside of rallies that show you how extremists reacted to Trump's sort of rhetoric about stop the steal and invocation of political violence?
Yes, there were.
Okay. Let's look next at the video the video that's already been admitted into evidence. And before we play the video, tell us, what are we looking at here?
As the Stop the Steal conspiracy theory started galvanizing far-right extremists, one of the things we saw was a substantial increase in threats to election workers and election officials. And so here we're about to hear from one of the officials in Georgia, the Secretary of State's office, essentially asked President Trump to stop inciting violence. So that'll be his comments in the video.
So let's play the video, and then let's talk about how Trump responded to that request.
Okay.
What you don't want to be able to do when you step up and say this is stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence. Someone's going to get hurt, someone's going to get shot, someone's going to get killed. And it's not right.
Who was he telling to stop encouraging people to engage in violence?
President Trump.
Okay. How did President Trump respond to that specific call from the Georgia Secretary of State worker to stop telling people to engage in violence?
So to the right of the video you just played is Donald Trump tweeting a message, but also retweeting the video. Here's the clip of the video that you just saw. So we see in a comment, rigged election, show signatures and envelopes, expose massive voter fraud in Georgia. So we get the video where he's being asked to condemn violence, stop inspiring violence, and the response is to double down on the very thing that Mr. Sterling has claimed is inspiring the threats of violence towards the election workers and officials in Georgia. So the double down on the thing that's inspiring it, no reference to condemning violent threats or saying there's no place for that. That's completely omitted. And the video clip.
And the what?
And the video clip.
Based on your work, how would far-right extremists perceive Trump's response?
Endorsement, support. This is there's no condemnation. There's you get that admission that we talked about earlier, which is often perceived by far-right extremists as a sign of support. But also the doubling down on the very thing that's galvanizing the threats in the first place would be a sign of support from the perspective of far-right extremists.
I want to turn now to the days leading up to January 6th. In your review of what happened, did you find evidence that helped you understand why some attacked the Capitol?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I want to play, for demonstrative purposes only, a video, P81, and then we can talk about the context that these speeches fit into the larger January 6th event.
I want them to know that 1776 is always an option. These degenerates in the deep state are going to give us what we want, or we are going to shut this country down.
It's 1776. 1776, 1776, 1777.
So what do we see here, Dr. Simi, and why is this important for your work in this case?
In the first portion of the video clip, we see Allie Alexander talking about 1776 being an option. And you see the references to deep state being degenerates. So again, we're back to the dehumanizing language, which is an important piece of this in terms of enabling violence. So that's that portion of the beginning, and then the second kind of portion is Alex Jones shouting repeatedly 1776. And again, within this cultural context, that term is going to have a very specific meaning that's different than it would for outsiders outside of that context.
And in the video, we see a couple banners in the background. Just tell us what those banners show.
So you see one to my right, a white banner that says "Stop the Steal." Stop Steal in black lettering. There's a Trump banner 2020.
Okay, and now, do you know which people on January 6th that stormed the Capitol saw which political speech the day before?
No, I mean, certainly not across the board.
Yeah. And does that undercut your ability to explain sort of what happened on January 6th?
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
We're talking about a lot of different sources of influence. We're talking about what happened specifically on January 6th in terms of the speech at the Ellipse. We're talking about various tweets. We're talking about various events in the lead up to January 6th. For saying one thing is the source of the influence would not be really accurate. What we can see, though, is among far-right extremists, how these different sources of influence ultimately resulted in terms of producing the attack on the Capitol.
And in your work, did you see Donald Trump as sort of leading that influence?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, let's talk about what happened on January 6th.
So before, I think we're going to do, since it's been on 2 hours, let's take a break. But Mr. Gessler, I just want to make sure that you'll do cross probably immediately following without a break, because I'm assuming, Mr. Olson, you're kind of coming towards the end.
Yeah, I'll probably have another 20 to 30 minutes.
So we'll go straight into direct after Mr. Olson finishes. We'll go straight into cross after Mr. Olson finishes his direct. And we will be back at...
Just before we break, I just want to make sure we have a common understanding about our interaction with witnesses during breaks around the stand. I assume we're not to talk to them about the substance of the testimony on a break. Okay, great, thank you.
So we will be back at 10:15.
Okay.
Everyone may be seated. So I think we were at the day of.
Yes. Thank you, Your Honor. Just one quick housekeeping matter. Dr. Simi, over the break, I was looking at your report, and in your report you talk about a website called the Donald.win. Is that what we were talking about before?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to turn now to the morning of January 6th. Did Trump make any statements or remarks that you focused on before the speech?
Yes, I did.
Very,
I'm sorry, yes, I did.
okay. What do we see here on the morning of January 6th before the speech?
2 tweets from Donald Trump, both referencing Vice President Mike Pence. In the upper tweet, if Vice President Mike Pence comes through for us, we will win the presidency. Many states want to decertify the mistakes they made in certifying incorrect and even fraudulent numbers in a process not approved by the state legislatures. Mike can send it back.
So, Professor Simi, when you read, then you're even faster. And I have the advantage point of being able to see the court reporter stroke. So,
My sincere apologies.
I'm just trying to protect the record. Did you get it?
So let's not read the second tweet, Dr. Simi. But I do want to ask you, well, both focus on Mike Pence, right?
That's correct.
What significance does these early morning statements focusing on Mike Pence from Donald Trump have in your study?
It's part of the this stolen election that if Mike Pence takes certain actions, then Donald Trump would remain in power. Which again, for far-right extremists, they're seeing this in terms of the what's necessary to prevent the transfer of power for Donald Trump to remain president.
Now let's turn to some of the speech that Donald Trump gave on the Ellipse. But before we do that, can you tell us, did you see similarities or differences between the speeches of Donald Trump that we've looked at earlier today and the speech he gave on the Ellipse, in terms of use of language?
Yeah, many similarities.
Okay. Can you give us some examples that we should be looking for?
Sure. Certain aggressive kind of words in terms of phrasing things, the really strong emphasis again on this issue about an existential threat, the idea that something's going to be taken from you, your country, your culture, your way of life, these kind of themes that we've been discussing. Very prevalent.
All right. Let's watch the speech, and then I want to ask you a few questions about it, or portions of the speech.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede what is definitely wrong. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. We want to go back and we want to get this right. Because we're going to have somebody in there that should not be in there, and our country will be destroyed, and we're not going to stand for that. and we're going to have to fight much harder. Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. You will have a illegitimate president. That's what you'll have. And we can't let that happen. And fraud breaks up everything, doesn't it? When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. So we're going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I love Pennsylvania Avenue. And we're going to the Capitol.
What did we see in this speech that related to Trump's use of language? But you mentioned it's similar to what he's used before. What do we see here in terms of his use of language before that led to violence?
Fight or fighting, some variation is mentioned approximately 20 times in the speech. There's a strong emphasis on this. There's at one point the association between fighting and playing by a different set of rules when you have fraud. So there's this kind of what you might call permission in terms of using other actions than one might take. There is the focus on losing your country is a consistent theme. And there is a mention of peaceful and patriotic, which is also consistent with many things we've been talking about in terms of plausible deniability.
Based on your understanding of political extremism, how would extremists have understood Trump's repeated calls to fight in that speech?
A call to violence.
Why?
It's within far-right extremist culture, fighting is meant to be taken literally. That a call to fight for far-right extremism, especially within the context as it's laid out, that these threats are imminent and that you're going to lose your country, then fighting would be understood as requiring violent action.
Trump, in the speech, said, we're going to walk peacefully and patriotically. Why wouldn't the extremists in the audience have understood Trump calling only for a protest, a peaceful protest?
Part of it has to do with the emphasis. So we get back to contextual cues as being extremely important in terms of understanding how communication operates. And in this case, there's such a balance in favor of the fighting versus only the one reference to the peaceful, marching peacefully down to the Capitol. So there's a clear, for far extremes, there'll be a clear understanding that fighting is the real message, not being peaceful.
Is it your testimony that if you had watched that speech and nothing had happened, that you would have the same view? And I guess what worries me about all of this is it's all kind of in 2020 hindsight. We know what happened. So, first of all, did you watch the speech in real time?
No, I did not.
Okay. But is it your testimony that had you watched it in real time prior to knowing the ultimate result that you would have considered it a call to violence?
Yes, it is my testimony. Yeah, I was already concerned, certainly, about precursors to January 6th. And that speech in real time, given the language, the reference, the amount of emphasis on fighting, that would have given me very, very substantial concern that violence would be soon to follow.
Dr. Simi, if I could follow up on that. Did you have an interview with a reporter prior to the election in 2020?
Yes, I did.
And in that interview to the reporter for The Atlantic, I think?
That's correct.
Okay, and in that interview with The Atlantic, what did you say about the likelihood of political violence led by Donald Trump?
I said it was quite high, especially in a scenario if he was not reelected, that my concern was not necessarily the election itself, would be post-election, in particular as we get closer to inauguration time.
And did what we saw on January 6th reflect your concern that you made before the election?
Yes, it did.
About political violence led by Donald Trump?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Now, we've heard some testimony that some of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers already had a plan to attack the Capitol. You mentioned the 1776 return sort of planning document. How could this speech by Donald Trump affect them if they already had a plan and are already executing the plan?
Well, two things I just want to mention. First, the plan among those like the Proud Boys to go directly to the Capitol and essentially begin executing the attack, that was largely influenced by things that happened prior to January 6th that involved Donald Trump, not the least of which would have been the December 19th moving wild. In terms of what happens on January 6th, though, the individuals who ultimately marched to the Capitol and for those that take part in the attack on the Capitol, they are going there at the urging of Donald Trump. What that ends up doing, it creates a situation where you have this very much larger crowd than you would have had with just those that went directly to the Capitol. And of course, that, as Officer Hodges testified to yesterday, that becomes a weapon of sorts itself. Certainly becomes a force multiplier. And so that large number of individuals who that appear at the Capitol, and some of whom then directly take part in the attack, all of that becomes a reinforcement to those who went there directly.
And earlier, you talked about sort of the violence implementers, the violence planners. Remind us the term for the folks that are maybe open to it but don't show up with a plan.
They're well, refer to them exactly in those terms. There's also the term sympathetic bystander, which would fit some of those who marched to the Capitol as well, who may not have necessarily directly partaken in violence, but were there. And as was I think illustrated yesterday, just the size of the crowd became a very substantial obstacle and prevented the Capitol from being protected.
And you spoke. Well, let me ask a special question first. Based on your review of what happened on January 6th, did the crowd have a unity of purpose that you saw?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Even though some were more prone to violence than others?
Why don't you just answer the first question? The original question was, did the crowd have a unity of purpose that you saw?
Yeah, yes, it did. Go ahead.
Can you explain?
Yeah, sure. Certainly it wasn't that every single person was kind of single mind to the crowd, but you can see, as demonstrated in some of the video footage, some of the things that people said after the fact, some of the things we learned from some of the court documents, for example. You can see there were certainly a degree of unity of purpose in terms of coordination and cooperation and collaboration during the attack on the Capitol.
Okay. Let's play some videos from the Capitol. And Your Honor, P117 similarly is a list, is an exhibit that you sort of deemed admissible. We'll play it just for demonstrative purposes here because it involves folks other than Trump. But let's play this video and then I have a couple questions for you, Dr. Simi. So I want to first focus on the first call. This is our house. This is a revolution. Based on your understanding of the communication patterns of far-right extremists, what does this as a revolution, how would that be interpreted?
It's a violent revolution. Of course, by this time, there has been various violent acts already taken.
And on the second clip, we see, with the language still on the screen, we see fight back, they touch us, we hit them back. How does that relate to some of the communication patterns we talked about today?
Very consistent with this theme of self-defense. So framing the violence that one might be committing, but setting it up as necessary to defend oneself.
And who's the they in here?
The members of the crowd, they're saying.
No, sorry, they touch us, we hit them back.
Yeah, the police officers.
Okay. Now, on the right, we see a flag flying there. We see two flags. What's the meaning of the symbolism in the bigger flag?
Yeah, so it's a U.S. flag there, but it has a 3% symbol in the blue portion. And then you can see in the background there's a Confederate flag, which is a pretty common symbol used among far-right extremists to represent the Confederacy in the U.S. Civil War.
Now, did you see, in your review of what happened at the Capitol, did you see other indicia that folks came planned to commit violence there?
Yes, I did.
Talk to us about what you saw that evidence folks came planning to commit violence.
Based on equipment the people brought, including weapons, but also things like tactical gear, headgear, various sorts of kind of preparation, things that would indicate a certain person had planned ahead of time that they would be engaged in violence.
You mentioned weapons, and I believe Mr. Gessler yesterday said there were no weapons discovered at the Capitol. Were there weapons discovered at the Capitol?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. What kinds of weapons?
Wide range, certainly knives. There was, of course, flagpoles that were used as weapons. Officers, in some cases, had their own weapons taken from them and used. And, of course,
Your Honor, we're going to object to this. He's testifying on items that he has no personal knowledge of. Obviously, he's able to base an expert report and develop his opinion based on hearsay. But here he's actually testifying as a fact to things he has no personal knowledge. To the extent the petitioners want to prove weaponry, they can use sources and whatever they seek to do, but they don't give you expert testimony.
Your Honor, if I may respond. This goes directly to Dr. Simi's observation that many of the right-wing extremists at the Capitol came prepared to do violence, just like they brought tactical gear. The fact that they brought weapons supports his claim, or his opinion, in finding that the people were there with a purpose of committing violence and engaging a violent political attack on the Capitol.
And was this disclosed?
Yes, it was on page 33 of this report.
You just need to move to page 33.
Oh, sorry, of course.
Your Honor, his opinion is that people coming armed to the Capitol is consistent. That is different than him providing substantive testimony that people actually were armed. If he wants to accept that information as a hypothetical, then he can base an opinion on it. But the fact of the matter is, Your Honor, when Mr. Olson said, and he's basing that on his observations, if he was at the Capitol on January 6th, he can certainly testify to that. And if that's the premise of his opinion, that's fine. But he doesn't get to testify as the actual testimony of that, the actual facts.
Okay, well, he was here and he watched the videos where we all saw people armed, but
You know, if I may just,
I mean, I'm taking it for what it's worth. Mr. Gessler, he obviously was not he wasn't at the Capitol, I presume, and so his testimony is based in part on what he's observed in court. I'm not going to strike his testimony that it's his understanding that people were armed.
you know, if I could, I just want to correct a significant misrepresentation that Mr. Gessler just made about the report. I put the page on the screen about what Dr. Simi actually said, and he didn't say what Mr. Gessler said. He says in the first line there, many who attended came prepared for violence, from those armed with weapons, including guns to tactical gear. And he talked through a list of significant examples where there were findings by people, either they refused to go through the magnometers or folks were arrested. So this is a significant and substantial disclosure that Mr. Gessler misrepresented.
So the objection is overruled.
He can testify.
All right, let me get us back to where we were. Great. So this is, we'll pick up where we left off, Dr. Simi, just to reorient us. We talked about this slide. Now, in addition to coming armed and with tactical gear, was there other evidence that you relied on in understanding the mob's purpose at the Capitol?
Sure, a variety of things, things that were apparent on video footage, things that were learned after the fact in terms of statements that individuals made, and then of course, prior to January 6th itself, the information that was available in open source on social media about the plans in terms of committing an attack on the Capitol.
Did you review as part of your work a collection of sort of social media statements that participants at the mob made describing why they were there and what their purpose was?
That's great.
Okay. Your Honor, I'm not offering this for admissibility, but just to talk about the basis for Dr. Simi's opinion. If I could bring up Exhibit P25 just to show the kinds of things he relied on. It's one that Your Honor said it's hearsay, in that we're not offering it as direct evidence, but it's a demonstration of the kind of material that Dr. Simi relied on.
Well, let's get him to confirm that first.
Okay. So, well, can I show it to him to make sure we're talking the same thing? Okay, great. Thank you. So, Dr. Simi, on the screen should be, nope, I'm sorry, I have the wrong exhibit. We'll move on, Your Honor, I apologize. But did you rely on a compilation of statements on social media as to why people were there at the Capitol?
Yes.
Can you just tell us in a high level what that was? Or the kind of statements they made, excuse me?
Yeah, to attack the Capitol, to prevent the certification of the election results, to disrupt the Democratic transfer of power.
Okay.
The Democratic transfer of power.
Did you, great. And then did you look at, sorry, we already saw that. Did you look at some videos of the mob itself in terms of their unity of purpose?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I think we've seen the video on the right a couple times. This is when Danny Hodges was attacked, so let's not play that, but tell us what the video on the left is.
This you're going to see a substantial number of folks start chanting a heave-ho, and so there's a coordination, kind of vocalization that they're engaged in as they're moving in a particular direction.
And what are they trying to do?
They're trying to essentially push through the barricade officers in this kind of tunnel area.
And, Your Honor, that was Exhibit P21, and it's on the objection was overruled. It was on to the admitted exhibit list. We've moved for admission of P21. Now, we've talked, let me skip to the next one. We've talked about the mob's purposes. Did you see any evidence in your review of the material in this case that showed Trump's role in the attack as the attackers viewed it, what they thought Trump's role in the attack was?
Yeah, there was definitely consistent themes in terms of individuals reporting that they believed Donald Trump had sent them there, indicating substantial influence from Donald Trump.
And this is video P96. Again, it is a video what happened on January 6th, Your Honor. It's on the to be admitted list from October 27th. We moved for submission as well.
Is this the one that was prepared by the January?
Yes, yes.
I will admit.
Great, thank you. So let's play the video, Dr. Simi.
What really made me want to come was the fact that, I had supported Trump all that time. I did believe, that the election was being stolen, and Trump asked us to come.
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, that's the only thing he's doing after me, I'll do it.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Did you call President Trump mentioning going to the Capitol during his speech?
Oh, yeah. So that's one of my disappointments. He said he was going to go, and he was going to leave it.
I know why I was there. That's because he called me there, and he laid out what is happening in the government. He laid it out.
But I remember Donald Trump telling you to be there. Are you having to support it?
So you mentioned the president asked you. Do you remember a specific message?
Basically, yeah, he asked for us to come to D.C., that big things are going to happen.
What got me interested, he said, I have something very important to say on January 6th or something like that. It's what got me interested here.
Trump is only asking me for two things. He asked me for my vote, and he asked me to come on January 6th.
And in addition to this compilation put together by the January 6th committee, did you see other evidence of the stated purpose why people were there?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And actually, I think I had the right exhibit. I was just looking at the wrong page from before, so let's try this again. I apologize. Again, for demonstrative purposes only, Your Honor, let's look at P25. And if we scroll down here, and I can just, can you read that okay, or do I need to make it bigger?
No, I can read that fine. Yes.
Okay. For instance, we see, is this part of what you looked at in your work on this case?
That's correct.
And we see statements like this that were collected as part of legal proceedings. I am here to see what my president called me to D.C. for. Do you see that?
Yes, I see
that. And then we see this sort of statement after statement of a similar vein. We can just pull on this page. And like we see a statement here from a Watson about why they went to D.C. Are these the kind of statements that you relied on to see the purpose for why these folks went to D.C.?
Yes, this would be consistent.
Okay. Now, I want to turn back to the attack on the Capitol. And did we...
I am going to exclude 96. I apologize. I think I must not have watched the whole thing. I'm going to exclude it as hearsay. That doesn't mean if that's something that Mr. Simi would consider informing his opinions that he can do that, but I'm not going to admit it into evidence. So 96 is excluded.
Thank you, Your Honor. And just to make sure the record's clear, Dr. Simi, did you look at Exhibit 96 and other statements by folks at the Capitol as part of forming your opinion today? Okay, great. Now, did Trump do anything during the attack that influenced the extremists engaging in it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Did Trump do anything during the attack that influenced the extremists engaging in it?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, there's the tweet that we're looking at here from Donald Trump indicates that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what he was expecting, what he wanted, and that the fraud would not be rectified. Basically, that Mike Pence was supposed to rectify the stolen election, and that did not happen.
We saw the tweets earlier in the day where Trump was focused on Mike Pence, right?
Yes, that's right.
And did Trump talk about Mike Pence's courage in the ellipse speech?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And so now he says Mike Pence didn't have the courage. Now, we've seen the video of the person reading this tweet with a bullhorn, so I'm not going to replay that now. But I do want to ask you about one image from that video, which is the noose that we see there. Based on your study of the right-wing extremists, does a noose have any particular meaning in that movement?
Within far-right extremist culture, there is a particular book that has a substantial amount of influence called The Turner Diaries. It's published in 1978. And it's a fantasy fictional novel, but it envisions a revolution within the United States. And there's a passage in the book that's referred to as the Day of the Rope. And the Day of the Rope in the novel, what they call race traitors, political opponents of various sorts, are hung from light posts or lampposts. And this is mass killing. And that term, Day of the Rope, has a lot of salience among far-right extremists. We actually saw it used by one of the members of the Proud Boys, specifically referencing what was going to happen on January 6th, used the term. It's going to be Day of the Rope, and I'm paraphrasing, but something to that effect.
Okay. Now, did Trump eventually say something that caused the crowd to stop their attack?
Yes, he did.
Great. Let's look at this. Was this video what you had in mind?
Yes.
Okay. I know we played this video before, but let's play it one more time. I'd like to get your input on the video based on some of our earlier conversations today.
I know you're pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Dr. Simi, based on our discussions of how leaders of right-wing extremists communicate to their followers, how does this speech fit into that context, communication style?
From the perspective of far-right extremists, I think there's three things happening here. One is a continuing affirmation of the stolen election conspiracy theory, so really continuing to emphasize the idea of the election was stolen. Two, an affirmation of the attackers and the attack that just happened. And then three, there is consistent messaging in terms of going home.
Why is that consistent messaging in terms of going home notable in your experience?
It's not just a one-off. It's not just something that seems more about developing plausible deniability, but it does come across as a consistent theme that this is what Donald Trump wants us to do.
Did he, in this speech, condemn the acts of violence?
No, he did not.
I want to turn to one last tweet from Donald Trump. This is was this before or after the speech we just saw?
This is after.
Okay. And how does this tweet about what happened that day fit into the pattern of communication of leaders of far-right extremism?
Again, there's no condemnation. There's affirmation. Again, further emphasizing the stolen election, referring to patriots, great patriots actually. So for far-right extremists, that is a very substantial, meaningful term because they see themselves as patriots. And this emphasis on being treated unfairly.
Does Donald Trump continue to enjoy strong support from far-right extremists?
Yes, he does.
Okay. Now, I forgot to ask this earlier. Before we get to your sort of headline, or your conclusions here, Dr. Simi, have you been paid for your work in this case?
Yes, I have.
Tell us how much you've been paid and what your hourly rate is.
Approximately $35,000.
Okay, what's your hourly rate?
$300 an hour.
Okay, is that your standard rate?
That's my standard.
Okay, thank you. Let's look at sort of the conclusion slide here. Could you describe for the court your conclusions about the issues that you were asked to address in this case?
January 6th, in terms of the attack on the Capitol, certainly should be seen within a larger, longer context of political violence committed by far-right extremists. There's certainly a high degree of evidence supporting that the violence was committed for political goals, political purposes. Certainly it was a large number of people and planning and organization that was present, apparent in terms of the attack on the Capitol, and that the goal really was focused on preventing the democratic transfer of power. Now, within that context of far-right extremist violence, January 6th does have some unique aspects to it that are also important to underscore. So the size, the intensity, the scope would stand out in terms of what's represented by the attack on the Capitol. And thus, most notably, the role that Donald Trump played in terms of influencing the events. The nurturing of the violence ultimately committed in terms of the attack on the Capitol, that would certainly be distinctive from other types of violence committed by far-right extremists.
How confident are you in your conclusion that Donald Trump played a central role, led these events?
Very confident.
Why is that?
It's in the evidence. It's from my years of studying how far-right extremists perceive communication, the relationship that they developed with Donald Trump over multiple years, the various signals, including everything from the things we've discussed at the rallies in terms of promoting or endorsing violence, the things done over social media, the messages in regards to various types of outgroups that are identified by far-right extremists that align with many of the things that Trump said over the years. So that relationship that was established and built really, I think, underscores how much influence he has for far-right extremists and how much they perceive him as essentially on their side or one of them.
And in this pattern, repeated pattern of communications, do you have any doubt in your mind that Donald Trump is aware of the influence his words have on right-wing extremists?
It seems pretty clear to me. I'm not in Donald Trump's mind, obviously, but in terms of observable patterns, in terms of the repeated nature of the things we've been discussing, that's all pretty apparent.
Okay. Your Honor, these are all the questions I had, but I wanted, if you had any additional things you wanted to ask Dr. Simi about, I wanted to make sure we covered those before I sat down.
Well, following up on that last question about, how, obviously, you're not a mind reader, you don't know what President Trump was thinking. I guess, what more can you say about the possibility that this just isn't just that he speaks this way versus deliberately speaking in a way that would cause people to react?
Well, again, I would come back to this point about, social scientists were trained to try and identify observable patterns. And so, I completely agree, not in Donald Trump's mind, but there are patterns that we've been discussing that were observable, that occurred over multiple years, where you had these kind of repeated, occurrences and things of similar nature kind of repeating to occur. And we also, from a far-right extremist perspective, had a lot of evidence about how they saw the relationship and how they saw his influence, how they saw him, what they believed to be endorsing and promoting their violence, their cause more broadly.
Right, but I guess how it's received is one element of, but that again doesn't. You don't have evidence that President Trump was trained on this kind of form of communication or anything like that, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a couple quick follow-up questions? The Unite the Right rally, when was that?
2017, August 2017.
And we saw that the speeches from when Trump was president commenting on very fine people on both sides, right? Okay. And the Proud Boys were involved in some of the Unite the Right rally?
Yes, they were.
Okay. So when you have a political rally where people or someone's murdered and other people are hurt, right? I'm sorry. And then you later have the president, unprompted, identifying that group by name, right?
Correct.
Objection. I'm not sure that was quite a question, but there was an answer to it. This is clearly leading an argument to.
Okay, well, I'll rephrase my question.
I'm going to sustain the objection, not on the argumentative part, but the.
Okay. You just talked about patterns, observable patterns of the social scientist.
That's right.
Okay. Is what we see between the 2017 rally, 2019 comment, is that an observable pattern or not in your mind?
Yes, it's certainly part of one.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, things that are said, things that are done, these are things that we can point to as happening or not happening. We can look at how the statements or actions are interpreted by others, how they're perceived by others. These are all things that we can, observe. Again, when we're talking about reading somebody's mind, that's not really observable.
But in terms of when you're talking about observable patterns, this is an example of one, right?
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Simi. I have no further questions at this time. We may get to talk again after Mr. Gessler, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Your Honor, I have about 3 or 4 minutes to fumble around with the technology, and I can't promise my fumbling will be over at that point, but just want to try and get set up here, Your Honor.
Okay.
How do I want to do this thing?
What do you need to do?
I'm going to want to be able to see videos as well. Maybe I don't even need to. Okay. Okay, Your Honor. I'm just going to try and go somewhat technology free. We'll see how that works, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Simi. How are you today?
Doing well.
Good. And we shook hands briefly yesterday outside the men's room, so thank you for being here. So since you've been a witness before, you know how this works. I'll ask you some questions. If I'm not clear on something, please just tell me.
Sounds good.
So I want to ask you a little bit about your methodology here. So it says there are about 217 interviews, you said, on far-right wing extremists?
That's right.
And over how many years is that?
Beginning in 1997.
Okay. So over about 26 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And 14 of the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and 3 percenters. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And how many of those interviews were people who participated in the January 6th riots?
So it sounds like some question answer. It's a little bit complicated. There's institutional review board regulations that provide confidentiality. So I certainly wouldn't be able to name individuals. I don't know if that was, that's kind of where you're going with the question.
Was that where you were going?
I may, but probably not.
I have a question, just as whether the people in your 14 were involved in January 6th protests.
None to my knowledge. However, it's certainly possible that obviously I don't know the identity of every single person participated in January 6th. So
right.
None to my knowledge.
So you may have interviewed person A, and that person may have shown up on January 6th, but you just don't know.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'd be fair to say that you interviewed these people well before January 6th, those 14?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Did you interview any participants, far-right-wing extremist participants in the January 6th, after January 6th?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Did you live with any families or people who participated in the January 6th riots?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Okay. So your interviews and sort of field work, living with people. I'm sorry. This field work consists of interviews and sort of embedding yourself or living with people. Would that be correct?
That's correct. The interviews can be either formal in nature or more informal.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm properly describing field work. So your field work also occurred with respect to this group of people before January 6th. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then as far as sort of embedding yourself or living with families, did you embed yourself or live with any families that participated in the January 6th riots, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. As far as the archives go, so which archives did you rely on here? I saw a number. Let me back up. So I saw a number of. We counted your expert report citations. We looked down, and I'm going to represent you. We counted about 78 citations to the January 6th report. Does that sound about right to you?
I counted the same number.
Well, that's good. Thank you for answering the question that way. What other archives did you rely on?
So as I mentioned, archives can be more formal in nature or informal in nature. So social media, for example, would be those would, the various platforms or all types of archives, which has been a big part of my research and what I've looked at, including in this case. So various social media platforms would fit there. Certainly videos. Again, I mentioned at the outset, YouTube really is an important type of archive. It's widely used among researchers in terms of accessing different kinds of collections of material. They're housed in that. Again, that's not established for research purposes, but it provides information.
So let me ask you a question. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I may do that a little bit, but so in determining, how do you determine whether you're going to look at one social media archive versus another archive, or do you just choose every single archive you can get your hands on? I mean, how does that selection process occur?
Yeah, some archives have a greater presence of far-right extremists than others, but you certainly want to try and sample from as many different archives as possible. It's being unlikely to be able to use every single social media platform, but I've certainly utilized the kind of major social media platforms that are more you might call mainstream type platforms like Twitter, or what used to be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, but then also more what you might call niche or fringe social media platforms like Telegram, but it has a substantial concentration of far-right extremists.
So let me ask you this. So if there's a body of opinion, you say a body of opinion among sort of far-right extremists, what measurements do you have in your profession to determine whether or not a particular archive is representative of that body of opinion?
What you would look at is really the presence, so try and make some determination about their presence on that particular platform.
Okay, so it'd be fair to say that the ones that are sort of have a greater presence or sort of more commentary, perhaps louder commentary. I don't know quite how you measure loud in the social media world. They type in all caps.
Yeah, you look at intensity.
Intensity.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for instance, a call to violence would be obviously a more intense statement on a social media platform than a statement that didn't involve a call to violence.
Okay, and so that's in part how you choose what to look at. You look at the intensity and the amount of presence.
Those are two things.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, you want to look at how the social media platforms compare to each other as well. That way you get a sense of is there kind of differences in terms of how one platform is used versus another.
Okay. And is any one platform, in your experience, more representative of sort of the body of far right-wing opinions?
I don't think there is, in my opinion, and certainly in the literature, there's never been, to my knowledge, any kind of published scholarly identification of one platform being most representative.
Okay. So I want to apply that, maybe take it down one level for the January 6th rioters. Okay. Did you look at any particular platform that you believe represents the entire spectrum of views, best represents the entire spectrum of views of people who rioted on January 6th?
Well, I don't think there is one single platform, but I certainly looked at a number of different platforms.
Okay.
To include some of the ones I already mentioned, Telegram, for example.
And you chose those platforms in part based on the intensity of the commentary on there and the volume of commentary. Is that fair to say? In part.
Not quite. I just want to back up on the intensity. The intensity is something you look at in terms of no matter what their presence is on the platform. You would look at that would be one indicator of the kind of the nature of the speech and whether there are calls to violence. So you wouldn't assume necessarily that there's a high degree of intensity.
So how do you measure or identify the opinions of people who aren't on social media platforms?
Well, that's why you don't exclusively rely on social media. Certainly, that's what the field work.
So interviews,
yeah, absolutely.
field work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Surveys can be done.
Okay. Did you do any surveys of participants in the January 6th riots?
No, I did not.
Okay. So you looked at social media platforms, you looked at the January 6th report, correct?
Those are two things.
What else?
Well, again, scholarly research that's related to the topic certainly looks to ask.
May I interrupt you just for a second? So what scholarly research did you look specifically with respect to January 6th events?
I thought you meant political violence more.
No, I understand. But I'm talking, that's why I interrupted you to redirect you. So specifically with January 6th, I saw that you wrote a scholarly work, you published work on that, is that correct?
That's right.
Have you consulted any others?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We certainly have looked at other expert testimony in regards to
For this report? For the report that you produced today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Archive of expert testimony.
Okay. So you looked at other people's opinions on January 6th?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit about patterns of behavior. So we talked about patterns of behavior, and I want to make sure I understand sort of correctly what some of these patterns of behavior. Well, one you said was sort of conspiracy belief in conspiracy or shadowy forces.
Yeah, that's a core belief.
Okay. And the us versus them. Okay. Sort of an anti-democratic ethos is what you called that, authoritarianism?
That would be another element.
Okay. You said violence.
That's a practice. Yes.
Okay. And then you talked about using various communication strategies.
That's right.
Okay. Now, I want to take each one of those. My understanding is, from your testimony, is that probably except for violence, a lot of these others are sort of commonly used in political discourse by others. Is that fair to say?
They're generic features of social life, human behavior, which is what makes it so powerful.
Okay. So, for example, conspiracy theories and shadowy forces, is that would be fair to say is often used in political discourse, correct?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I thought you were speaking exclusively about the communication strategy. Conspiracy theory, there's obviously, when you look at, for instance, surveys that measure belief in conspiracy theory, there's quite a bit of variability, so that's not necessarily the same. It doesn't have the generic feature the way, say, the use of doublespeak does.
Okay. But let's focus on conspiracy theories, for example. So are you familiar with political discourse where people will complain about special interests controlling our government?
Yes, I've heard those phrases.
Yeah, and you agree with me that's a common feature for people sort of across the political spectrum to be angry or upset about special interests controlling government?
I think that's fair.
Okay. People will talk about big oil or big corporations or big labor. Those are all sort of a variant of a conspiracy theory. Is that fair to say?
It could be.
Yeah. And in fact, that goes back quite a way. Are you familiar with the political science Richard Hofstadter?
Yes, I am.
And he wrote a very famous book in 1964 called The Paranoid Style of American Politics, right?
Yeah.
And he sort of talked about conspiracy theories as in American politics, how they were a consistent feature as far back now 60 years ago. Is that fair to say?
It is.
Okay.
And the group of scholars that Richard Hofstadter was associated with did identify, though, what they call right-wing radicalism was especially characterized by conspiratorialism.
Yeah. But they also said that it was a common feature throughout American politics.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. How about, let's talk about us versus them. Be fair to say that that's a common theme in American politics as well. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. Democrats are angry at Republicans. There's an us versus them element, and Republicans can get angry at Democrats. There's an us versus them element. Fits both sides of the political spectrum. Is that fair to say?
Sure. What we're talking about here is us and them when it's associated so closely with violence, which
Understood.
wouldn't be a common feature.
Understood. But I'm trying to isolate each one to get a better sense of this. I'm sorry. And then an anti-democratic ethos or authoritarianism. I think would you agree with me that that's also a very frequently occurring or common feature in American politics?
I don't know that I would agree.
Okay. So would you agree with me that people on both sides of the political spectrum are sometimes frustrated and say that the legislature or Congress can't be trusted?
That's a statement I've heard from various political orientations. Sure.
Okay. You've heard, in fact, we've heard presidents talk about how if Congress isn't going to do something, they're going to take matters into their own hands. We've heard that from both sides of the spectrum. Would that be fair to say?
Can you repeat that?
We've heard that from both sort of political parties, but presidents who get frustrated with Congress not moving forward on legislation talk about how they're going to take things into their own hands.
Okay.
Okay. You've heard arguments where, or I'll ask you, would it be fair to say you've heard arguments where people on both sides of the political spectrum throughout will argue that the legislature should not be taking action, that it's up to the courts to decide. Is that fair to say?
Generally?
Yeah. Okay. And so your point is that the thing that characterizes far-right extremism is that they have sort of these elements, and then they add to it the mix of violence. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, that's a defining feature of extremism.
Okay.
Close relationship to violence.
Okay. Let's talk about communication strategies. So you talked a little bit about doublespeak, correct? And if I remember correctly, you said that we sort of all do doublespeak to some effect. To some extent, I'm sorry. We all do doublespeak to some extent.
That's right.
Okay. And I think you use the example, sometimes we'll emphasize a particular aspect towards a job interviewer and a different aspect or different face, as it were, towards perhaps a romantic partner or something like that.
Actually, I use that example to illustrate the front-backstage behavior distinction, which is a different concept.
Okay. I'll get to that in a minute. Let me continue to focus on the doublespeak. So doublespeak would be saying one thing in public and a different thing in private. Is that fair to say?
That could be an example. It's also saying one thing, irrespective of whether it's public or private, that could be interpreted in different ways depending on the audience's understanding. And so it might be understood in one way by outsiders who don't have a good kind of contextual understanding of a particular culture, and then a different way by insiders within a specific culture will understand it to mean something different than what outsiders would.
Okay, so is doublespeak?
Same word, different understanding.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. So a person will use the same word in front of one audience, which has a particular meaning, and then they'll use the same word in front of a different audience that has a different meaning. Is that doublespeak?
That would be an example of doublespeak, or a facet of doublespeak. And again, I would say, underscore again, this is a generic facet of communication. Oftentimes it's innocuous. Sometimes it actually even has well-intentioned aspects to it in terms of maybe not wanting to use certain language that could be interpreted in different ways so as to not offend someone. For example, to try and be polite or kind of adhere to some form of etiquette. Again, I'm underscoring that for far-right extremists, it's deeply connected to violence.
Okay, but it's, so as I heard you say, but it's...
I'm sorry, you said it's deeper connected to what?
Deeply connected to the violence issue.
I'm sorry, did you say deeper or deeply connected to? Deeply, okay. So your characteristic, your application to far-right extremists is that they'll use doublespeak, just like everyone else, but they also connect it to violence. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Okay, okay. And then you talked about a couple of the communication. I want to just sort of go through these. Front and backstage. That was one of them, where you're sort of favorable, you put a favorable foot forward in front of someone and then a different aspect or personality in front of someone else. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. And that was the example of a person will behave one way towards in a job interview and behave a different way towards a romantic partner.
That's right.
And that would sort of be a form of doublespeak.
Or front and back.
I'm sorry. That would be a form of front and back. I'll work on my sociology degree during this cross-examination. And so would one example of sort of doublespeak be a politician who presents him or herself in a very moderate way in front of one group and a very radical way in front of a different group? Would that be a form of doublespeak?
That would involve, that would likely involve language that would kind of fit the characteristics of doublespeak.
Okay.
Based on what you described.
So doublespeak, you use different language between the two audiences?
Well, you may use different language, or you may use the same language with the understanding that audiences will potentially receive it differently.
Okay. Okay. So I say okay, but I'm not understanding. So, so doublespeak. Why don't you give me doublespeak in your words, and let me go from there.
Sure. We talked about 1776, for example. We talked about 1776, for example. So the term for insiders within far-right extremist culture is understood in a way that would likely be different for outsiders who aren't steeped in that culture. So it's the same term, but it's understood differently depending on kind of cultural context, which is really what doublespeak is all about. It's about basically contextual understandings and how they vary depending on a whole host of different factors, including the situation, the audience, what their understanding is, tone of voice, and you can imagine there's lots of different things that go into how contextual cues shape understanding.
Okay, so let me see if I can understand it. So let's say I'm involved in politics. I'm running for office, or I'm an office holder, and I go to a 4th of July parade, and I give a speech. And the speech says, "Remember the spirit of 1776. This is why our forebears fought and died," sort of a rousing patriotic speech. And I frequently use the term 1776. Okay? And there's far right-wing extremists in that audience. Okay? And then let's say I do the same speech at a different, I'm going to a bunch of 4th of July parades. So I go to one 4th of July parade and give that rousing speech, and there's far right-wing extremists in it. And then I go to another 4th of July parade and give the same rousing speech. There's something pretty close, because I practiced a lot. So I'm giving a pretty close speech. Maybe I even wave a 1776 flag as part of my speech in both audiences. And that one contains no far right-wing extremists. Is that a form of doublespeak?
Yeah, you can have different understandings.
Okay, because one crowd will understand it in a particular way, and the other crowd will understand it in a different way.
Yes.
That's doublespeak?
Based on cultural context.
Okay. Now, as a speaker, do I have to know that there's far right-wing extremists in one audience, and do I have to know that there aren't far right-wing extremists in the other audience in order for that to be doublespeak?
Not necessarily.
So if I want to make sure I have so if I'm this politician, and I'm running for office, or I'm holding office, and I give my rousing 4th of July speech in front of far right-wing extremists, and I don't know they're far right extremists. I mean, some of them have salt and pepper beards, like a grandfather. I don't know. They may, maybe not. But let's say there are people, but I just don't know it. Okay? And then I go to this other rally, same speech, no far right-wing extremists. I have engaged in, from a sociological standpoint, doublespeak. Would that be fair to say?
Well, what I've described here in terms of far-right extremism is the doublespeak tends to be intentional. So you've described something that may not be intentional.
I understand, and I've been very clear on sort of my hypothetical where it's not intentional. But I'm asking, is it still doublespeak if it's not intentional?
Well, It may have similar consequences. So the consequence of the effect of it, in terms of how it's received, and that would constitute an aspect of doublespeak. It wouldn't be kind of true doublespeak without more of an intentional aspect to it.
Okay, so it would be fair to say it's characteristic of doublespeak, but absent intentionality, it's not true doublespeak. Is that fair to say?
As far as how doublespeak is practiced by far-right extremists, it's associated with a high degree of intentionality.
Okay, so far-right extremists will be intentional about how they do that?
Part of the culture.
Okay, but you can have someone doing the same thing unintentionally, and they're not a far-right extremist. Let me rephrase that question. That's a terrible question. So you're saying far right-wing extremists, they're intentional about it, correct?
Within far-right extremist culture, doublespeak is used in intentional fashion.
Okay. And so it's fair to say that when you define doublespeak with respect to far right-wing extremists, you're implying intentionality. The speaker intends to have a different effect on different audiences.
That's correct. And part of that has to do with the violence aspect.
Right. And to some extent or it would imply that the speaker knows that there's different audiences, and that's why he or she is using the doublespeak, because they understand their audiences.
Or they may suspect.
Or they may even suspect.
Yeah, they may not be sure about potential differences, but they may have some reason.
Okay. And, all right, so you have to understand the intentionality first before really understanding whether it's a far right-wing speaker using doublespeak. Is that fair to say?
Can you rephrase that question?
So you need to understand intentionality before you can understand whether a far right-wing speaker is actually using doublespeak.
Well, you can observe the practice. So the practice certainly can be observed.
Okay. So you can observe the practice and you can say, well, one audience here, one audience there. It correlates. It correlates with doublespeak. You can say that.
Correlates, consistent.
Okay. But you don't really know if that speaker is engaging in doublespeak absent some understanding of their intent.
Yes, that's why the field work and interviews is so important.
Absolutely.
The material, in some cases, will oftentimes betray intent to a factor or another. That's the example of broad rating.
That's the example of, I'm sorry?
The example from the organizer Unite the Right that we discussed earlier, when he was talking about how humor is used in terms of that way to establish uncertainty among audiences, so folks don't know when they're seriously promoting violence versus joking about it.
Okay. Now you had also talked about how someone will make a statement, and I think you spoke about this in the context of some of President Trump's speeches, but how someone will make a statement and then negate that statement. Correct?
Yeah, certain negation of something.
Okay. So something like, go do something terrible, but I'm just joking, or don't really do it. Would that be an example?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, the video clip we saw of Nick Fuentes doing that.
Okay. And you say that's very common among right-wing extremists?
What we found in our research is what a number of other scholars have found.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the last, you said?
That's what a number of other scholars have found.
Okay. And I think you had talked about, if I remember correctly, there was a video from President Trump's press conference after a Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I have in my notes that you use that as an example of a failure to condemn. Was that right?
I said there was a statement that was perceived by far-right extremists as promotion, despite, we showed two clips, if you recall. The first clip about fine people on both sides, and the second clip had these type of condemnation. And that for far-right extremists was overridden by the fine people on both sides comment.
Okay. So the fine people on both sides, so the right-wing extremists listened to the fine people on both sides, and they said, that speaks to us. And then the condemnation in the second clip, they said, oh, President Trump's just saying that because he has to.
It's almost a verbatim quote from Andrew England that just said so. Yeah, I agree with you.
I don't exactly know who he is.
He's the founder of the Daily Stormer. And,
okay. So maybe that's an example of how I will represent you, a lawyer who's not a far-right extremist, may use similar language as a far-right extremist.
Well,
it's an example in front of you. So
I interpret your comments paraphrasing what far-right extremists might say.
Yeah, I know. I'm not accusing you of calling me a far-right-wing extremist. Okay. Let's...
Professors, make sure to let the patients questions before you start answering them.
Okay.
Yeah, and my paralegal just sent me a note admonishing me to behave better. Your Honor, can we take a 1 or 2 minute break? I just need to figure out a way to get the right video loaded and identified. Thank you. Okay. Charlottesville. So I'm going to show you a clip, and I think this was the clip that you testified about earlier.
Okay.
Can we play that, please? Starting at 55.
I'm saying is this, you had a group on one side of you had some very bad people there, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest and taking down, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. So George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now,
Okay, let's hold. So I'm going to stop there. So it's your, so based on your study, and it's your analysis that, so the first part of his talk where he said, find people on both sides, that the far-right extremists sort of took comfort in that and took inspiration. And then the second part where he said, neo-Nazis, they should be condemned entirely and whatnot. They view that as doublespeak.
Establishing plausible deniability.
Okay.
Certain indication after offering a source of affirmation.
Okay. So I'm going to show you a video from the day before this, okay? And that's number 1059, please. And start that at 140. Yep, 140.
With an update. And wounded 20 others. To anyone who acted criminally in this weekend's racist violence,
Can you pull that for a
you
second?
will be
Okay, let's start that over, please.
held fully accountable.
Let's go back about 5 seconds, please. How did we practice law before videotapes?
To anyone who acted criminally in this weekend's racist violence, you will be held fully accountable. Justice will be delivered. As I said on Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And as I have said many times before, no matter the color of our skin, we all live under the same laws. We all salute the same great flag. And we are all made by the same Almighty God.
Okay.
We must love each other.
So I'm going to represent to you that speech from the White House took place the day before. When put in conjunction with the April 15th, how did far-right extremists interpret those statements? Did they view that, let me be more specific, did they view that as an example of plausible deniability?
Remember these remarks at the time, in real time, and it was, no, it was not taken, because these set of remarks were very clear. And when they, what I think really, you have to understand, there was already a relationship between Donald Trump and far-right extremists prior to 2017, and far-right extremists were already perceiving him in certain ways. But those set of remarks, if that had been the final word, if possible, their understanding obviously would have been different, at least as pertaining to the United Right now. But they weren't. They were followed by the comments that we saw previously about finding people on both sides. And so that's ultimately what far-right extremists took from Donald Trump in terms of his characterization of what happened in Charlottesville.
Okay, so let me understand this correctly. So Donald Trump goes to the White House. He makes a statement where he's condemning people from both sides. And the far-right extremists sort of look at that. But then then the next day, Donald Trump in this press conference says they're going to find people on both sides, and then about a minute later condemns the KKK and neo-Nazis. And so you're saying that far-right extremists took from this was really the find people on both sides. That's what inspired them, and that they essentially disregarded the press conference before, and they disregarded the comments. I'm sorry, they disregarded the White House press conference before, and they disregarded the latter marks subsequent to the very fine people. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'm saying
okay.
The far-right extremists are pretty clear on that in terms of converting what we had just characterized.
Okay. So I guess, the analogy that came to my mind is, did you ever see the movie Dumb and Dumber?
I never have.
Okay. I'm going to describe to you a scene. Maybe you've heard the scene. There's a scene where sort of the protagonist, I think he's played by John Kerry, he's the guy who's, I don't know if he's the dumber guy, but he's talking to a woman he has a crush on, and he says something along the lines of, if we were the only people left on Earth, okay, would you like me? Would you want me? And she says, well, maybe something along the lines of 1 in a million chances. And he gets this big smile on his face, and he says, so you're telling me there's a chance? You ever hear that scene? Now,
Vaguely familiar, but not a...
would that seem sort of describe a far-right extremist, where they're always looking for something to latch onto that they believe inspires them, and will disregard any other evidence to the contrary?
No, I don't think that's consistent with the pattern in terms of the relationship between Donald Trump and far-right extremists. And I will say, going back to Unite the Right and Find People, we have to put that in context. Saying to people, this is not something far-right extremists are used to hearing from the President of the United States. And so that did have a substantial overriding effect. And you can understand why, given their views typically of politicians, conventional politicians. And so I think the way you just characterized it is not really consistent with that history in terms of the relationship between Donald Trump and far-right extremists.
Okay. Let me ask you about the 1776 again. I think you had said that sort of far-right extremists view the number 1776, or the phrase involving 1776, as a call to violence, right? Within their circles. And it's sort of, and you use that
within their circles in certain contexts.
And you said that it takes time for someone to develop that understanding. Was that correct?
Yes, I said that in terms of the more people become immersed over time, the more understanding they'll develop.
So if I'm someone who's not part of the far right-wing extreme movement, and I see the number 1776 or the spirit of 1776, it's unlikely I'll view that as a call to violence. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's fair to say.
And then I start hanging out with these far right extremists, and they start using this term 1776, and it'll take a while, but eventually, if I subscribe to the far right extremism, I'll view that as a call to violence, a coded call to violence when it's used.
Well, the amount of time it takes is going to vary a lot, depending on a whole host of different factors. There's no formula certainly that says it's going to take X number of hours, or days, weeks, or months. It's going to depend on how much exposure a person has, the types of exposure. But generally speaking, yes, as a person becomes more familiar with the culture, they'll start to develop an understanding.
Okay. Okay, let me ask you a little bit about the Stop the Steal. Okay. Is it your testimony that talking about stealing a stolen election is consistent with far-right extremism?
Particularly political corruption and fraud. If these have high degrees of stealing, doesn't mean every time those terms are used that's indicative of far-right extremism. But within far-right extremist culture, those terms are very meaningful and would tend to resonate with their worldview.
Would you agree with me that concerns or being upset about a stolen election is a common feature of modern American politics?
Yeah.
And you'd agree with me that people who were opposed to Donald Trump thought that or voiced concern, some of them, that the 2016 election was stolen because of Russian interference?
Yeah, I am familiar with those.
Okay. And that, in fact, there was an election in Georgia in which the person who lost, she argued that the election wasn't valid and was essentially stolen because of voter suppression. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
Okay. So it's the stolen election theme, unfair election forces that stole the election, that's not uncommon, correct?
It's not my opinion that it's exclusive to far-right extremism. Okay. In terms of these issues.
But what makes it connected to far-right extremism is the connection towards violence. Is that correct?
Connection towards violence and, again, contextual issues that when certain allegations are made as it relates to a stolen election, it would have more meaning in some cases for far-right extremists than some of the examples for instance that you just pointed to.
Okay. So if Hillary Clinton, the loser of the 2016, says our election was stolen, Donald Trump is an illegitimate president because of Russian interference, that would not have resonance for far-right wing extremists.
Far-right extremists would perceive Hillary Clinton or do perceive Hillary Clinton in very antagonistic terms.
Right. And if Donald Trump were to say the same thing, and I understand he didn't blame Russia for the 2020 election, but were he to say almost the same thing word for word and blame a foreign power, that would resonate with far right-wing extremists. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. Because of this relationship that we were talking about, the pattern over time that developed between Donald Trump and far-right extremists, those claims would have a very different meaning for far-right extremists than, as you pointed out, Hillary Clinton making similar claims in that scenario.
Okay. Now, let's So, Your Honor, before I continue, I would like to move to admit the exhibit. I believe that's 1060. I'm sorry. Let me make sure I have my numbers correct. Yeah, I believe number 1060 has already, that's the same video that's already been admitted at the press conference. And we move to admit number 1059, the press conference at the Oval Office. So let me also understand that. So when President Trump talked about the immigrants from Mexico, some of them being rapists, and assuming some of them were very fine people. Your testimony was that was a clarion call for the far-right extremists.
They heard that, those messages, those terms, and the substantial alignment that it had with their own conversations as it relates to immigration was very close alignment, and they found that speech, and especially that part of the speech, to be very powerful. And he started to have a lot of discussion among far-right extremists after his announcement, and when he was given that the announcement included those terms.
Okay. And that if, so there's been a lot of debate, I'll submit to you, about immigrants, some people refer to them as illegal immigrants or illegal aliens, there's a number of phrases, but of people who have recently entered the United States being in northern cities, and there's mayors that are sort of getting upset by that. If a mayor like that, let's call it a Democratic mayor, someone who's not viewed as a conservative or sympathetic to the far right, so if a Democratic mayor were to use those same words, would that be a clarion call to the far right?
In a hypothetical situation without any other contextual information, it's hard to say. It would depend on that person, their history, what the far right knew or didn't know about that person, which is why, again, I mentioned that with the 2015 campaign announcement, you can't take that in isolation. You also have to take into consideration the currency he had developed based on the birtherism claims and the involvement he had in terms of promoting that conspiracy theory, which was a major facet of far-right extremism in terms of challenging Barack Obama's legitimacy to serve as president, and frankly, just being very antagonistic about his election.
Okay. So it'd be fair to say that it takes a period of time, a consistent pattern of behavior by a politician before the far right-wing extremist will view his or her comments as a clarion call to action. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's just hard to say exactly how long it would take, but certainly these would have patterns take time to emerge.
Okay, so it could be a couple months, a couple years, but it requires a pattern of behavior.
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to be jumping around a little bit, so I will apologize to you perhaps for a lack of thematic development.
No problem.
I want to go back to sort of the deniability. Where you said President Trump would say one thing and then immediately negate it afterwards. Do you remember that?
I don't remember him saying immediately.
Okay, but would negate it afterwards.
That's a common feature.
Okay.
For far-right extremist leaders in general, and much of what we've been discussing fits that pattern in terms of the relationship between Donald Trump and far-right extremists.
Okay. I'm going to show you a video and ask you if certain speech, if that fits the pattern. May we take Your Honor, I may take a few minutes here, so I apologize if I do. Can we look at this? Let's look at 50 silent. Can you do it just on your computer? Just check. Okay. All right. I'm not going to be able to find the video quickly, so I'm just going to talk to you about it.
So it's student.
So I have a respite to find my video, is that right?
I'm going to Hail Mary here to find all your videos, so you're not eating away time on finding videos.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So why don't we just reconvene your cross at 11 o'clock?
Okay, thank you.
We're off the record.